Reincarnation is like playing Russian roulette. You may have to return as an animal or even as a cockroach running across the floor, so if you're lucky enough to be human again, it's like having beaten fate. Our protagonist was lucky enough to survive this game of chance. Roulette stopped in human once again, but in his previous life, he literally killed himself to work. Everything looked promising on this new opportunity, but there was one detail. The body he had reincarnated in belonged to a minor character in a dark, depressing novel he used to enjoy. Specifically, he had become a half-haired villain who dies in the first chapter, a hopeless troublemaker. As he reflected on his unfortunate situation with an expression of disappointment, the panel revealed that Ansia was a talented but lazy young man, with a dangerous interest in black magic, which eventually led him to his tragic end, by discovering a taboo. Furthermore, he had a petty personality, unable to overcome his greed, and ended up dying as an insignificant character. His abilities were so unpromising that it wasn't even worth dwelling on them. Rather, let's focus on the real problem. Our protagonist found himself in a problematic situation, cursing the Wheel of Fortune for making him possess someone like Ansia. Half-jokingly, he demanded that if he had a choice, he would have chosen someone more promising, a hero, or at least someone handsome. He was sure that this situation would only bring him trouble. It was bad enough to own a cheap villain, but to do so in such a bleak context was even worse. The current stage was an auxiliary facility for dark mages. Ansia, once considered with high expectations due to his natural magical potential, had been briefly recognized but ultimately marginalized in the academy for his lack of practical skills. Apparently, Ansia had come here to join a black magic organization. Now, as he stood before them, the mysterious individuals watching him seemed to ignore him. One asked who he was, and another replied contemptuously that he was just a child, begging to join his organization. They also mentioned that I was a student at Adward Academy. This gave one of the men a bold idea. He looked at the boy with a malicious glint in his eyes and suggested that if he was an Adward student he might be subtle to him. Then he ordered her to follow him. Hearing this, he began to panic, sweating as he debated without obeying. However, he knew he couldn't defeat them, so he accepted and followed him. As they walked, one of the men asked him if he knew the procedure to join. He answered confidently, which of course he knew, although in his mind he thought that once he drew the blood from a limb and swore allegiance to black magic, he would be trapped forever. How could I not know? He also recalled that the organization of dark wizards, which Ansia was about to join, was a typical evil force destined to be destroyed by the protagonists of the novel. If he went ahead with the dark wizard contract, he knew he would be killed by the hero too. Instead of following those men, he realized that he needed to find a way to escape this death trap immediately, while worrying about his situation. It suddenly froze when a notification popped up, a system sync. With the prospect of eagerness, the sync loaded, I saw. When it was finally completed, the system issued a warning. Run away. Now surprised by the sudden appearance of what looked like a cheat code, he couldn't believe his luck, but the warning on the screen left him stunned for just a moment. Then, a loud scream echoed through the place like the chilling scream of someone being tortured, which increased his anxiety. One of the men asked his partner about the sound, wondering if something had happened in the basement. When one of them moved to investigate, he turned to him and threatened him, telling him that if he tried to flee, he would be dead. He warned her not to move. If he valued his life, he felt it pretending to live up to it. The moment they hurried to check out the commotion, he knew this was his chance. Once he was sure they were gone, he began to run, holding his breath. He ran down the dark corridors, but had no idea where the exit was. Exhausted, he stopped to catch his breath, muttering to himself that he was running like a madman without any sense of direction. As he stopped, he noticed a closed door ahead, and saw a light approaching, which made him wonder if he was going in the right direction. But this was just a guess. Before he could decide what to do, a sudden voice surprised him, realizing that a member of the dark magic group was passing by. He quickly hid. As he listened, he heard two men arguing about a boy who had escaped from the third basement. It was clear they were talking about him. Listening to the men's conversation, he felt a wave of panic, certain that if they found him, he would be dead. As the two men walked away, he scanned his surroundings, making sure it was safe. When he was sure there was no one else nearby, he ran to the door in front of him, but it was locked. Desperately, he tried to force it, knowing deep down that it was useless. When the door didn't open, despair seized him. Frantically he considered his options, cursing softly, realizing that in this situation, the only thing he could trust was his memory. Though eagerness was considered useless, he had to think of something. She remembered that while Ansia had no talent for white magic, she had been born with magical power in her body. However, the magic power was so uncontrollable that he couldn't even determine what it was doing. In other words, he just needed to concentrate and control his magic. Focusing intensely, he managed to direct the magical power to his fingertips, placing his hand on the lock. He released everything in the hope that he would open the door. Unfortunately, nothing happened. Exhaustion invaded him, worse than when he was running, catching his breath. He murmured that his skills were still far from adequate and that he had much to learn. Suddenly he felt a figure in the darkness behind him. She was approaching him with a dominating aura. Her eyes sparkled as she stared at him. Realizing something approaching, he turned, convinced that this was the end, but to his surprise he saw a beast, a small dragon, staring at him, roaring in an adorably high-pitched tone. Instead of being afraid, he was astonished. The dragon approached and tugged at his tunic, as if asking him to carry him. Baffled, he picked it up, wondering how such a creature had ended up in this place and why she was so friendly to him. As he pondered, he told the dragon coldly and bluntly that he couldn't take it with him. He explained that it was complicated enough to handle oneself, so how was he going to take care of a dragon? The little dragon, surprised by his words, began to pout and cry like an innocent baby. Despite his cool resolve, the dragon's antics were not impossible to ignore. With no other option, he decided to take it with him, as he continued running in frustration, muttering that the dragon was doing it on purpose. He knew he shouldn't adopt something he couldn't handle, but while he was running, he suddenly stopped, and realized that since he was in this situation, maybe he should try using the dragon's power. As he looked at the little dragon, the system suddenly appeared informing him that his take ability had been unlocked, and asking him if he wanted to tame the dragon. The system identified the creature as a suspicious offspring, and showed its level 2.50 magical power stats, along with strength, agility, and intelligence. He also had a level 1 flamethrower ability. Surprised and a little confused, he noticed something even more frustrating. There was no accept button on the system interface. He realized he would have to tame the dragon the old way. He began to assess his situation. Despite his frustration, he recalled that as far as shooting was concerned, he actually had quite a bit of experience and talent. Summarizing his technique, he used some gestures to offer tranquility and generate trust with the little dragon. With a serious expression, he told the dragon to trust him, although deep down, he wondered if he was doing it right. Fortunately, the dragon seemed to accept it as its contractor rubbed in the air, releasing a glowing light, a sign that the taming had been successful. As the dragon descended, he wondered if he had really succeeded, suspecting there might be more to it. However, he decided to give it a try. Right away. He called the reptilian dragon and gave it his first command, to break the lock on the door. The cute reptile stepped forward, eyes bright with determination, leapt and bit the chain of the lock, breaking it instantly. He was stunned. I didn't expect the lock to break so easily with the lock destroyed. They were finally about to escape. He praised the dragon, telling him good job, feeling a glimmer of hope that maybe they could get out alive. But suddenly he heard footsteps approaching and a wave of dread swept over him. Turning, he saw the men who had been chasing him. They saw him and mocked him, calling him a rat and threatening life chance. If they caught him, panic seized him, paralyzing him with fear, not knowing what to do. The men approached, and he forced himself to think. Desperate to find a solution, he remembered a spell called Mist, the first self-defense spell taught at the academy. It was a basic spell that created a cloud of smoke for concealment, so simple that even someone without magical talent could learn it. Although he knew the spell, he had never used it before, but in this situation he had no choice but to try it without further delay. He studied his breathing and concentrated his energy on his fingertips, imagining that he was holding a weapon for his relief. Light began to form on his fingers. The men stopped dead as the spell was quickly cast, enveloping the area in a thick cloud of smoke. Astonished and relieved that his spell worked, he took advantage of the distraction to flee, heading for the door. Just as he began to open it, a ghostly hand suddenly appeared, grabbing him by the neck. Startled and unable to breathe, he fell to the ground. His vision blurred as the hand smothered him. His loyal reptilian companion ran his eyes beside him, reflecting his own despair. He wondered if this was really the end. The man who had cast the demon spell mocked him, saying, "Do you think you can escape so easily? At least your death will be painless." Lying on the floor, he felt the weight of his desperate situation. Reincarnate only to die again was too unfair. He desperately tried to think of a way to free himself, even as he struggled to breathe. Just when things seemed truly desperate, he remembered one last card his pet reptile, the little dragon, could play. Sensing her anguish, she clung tightly to her robe, her eyes full of worry, struggling to speak, gasping. "If you really want to get out of here, you need to hear me apologize for his lackluster taming skills." He looked into the dragon's eyes with determination, and asked if I could help him. The little dragon spread its wings. His attitude changed to one of fierce determination. He approached the sorcerer, his eyes glowing with fiery intensity. Then, with a powerful roar, it unleashed a torrent of flames, a flamethrower attack that enveloped the man. As the flames consumed the man, the ghostly hand that choked him disappeared. Releasing him, gasping for air, he watched as the little dragon made sure the threat had been eliminated. Its flames left nothing but remnants, scorching the dragon. Then she turned to him, letting out a worried roar, as if asking if he was all right. Still catching his breath, he couldn't help smiling. He hadn't expected things to turn out this way, but he was immensely grateful to have such a loyal and powerful partner. The little dragon leapt upon him and they shared a moment of comfort, a brief respite from the chaos. Caressing the dragon's scales, he said softly, "I owe you my life. I promise I'll take care of you," but first he reminded himself that he needed to escape. 1 hour later they were now crossing a desert, seeking refuge in a distant cave. As they walked, putting more and more distance between themselves and the dark mages, he began to feel relief. However, the embracing sun was relentless, and he found himself increasingly thirsty. His little companion was also exhausted and thirsty, vowing not to be caught by these dark wizards. I never knew what it would mean if they did. Not far away, he saw a cart and approached, hoping to get some help. He asked the old driver if they could get a ride. The old man looked at him between closing his eyes and then asked him, "Do you have money to pay for the trip?" Without hesitation, he searched his tunic pocket and found a gold card. He showed it to the old man and asked if it would be enough to get him a ride. The old man's eyes widened at the card, recognizing it as one provided by Ardal Academy, a card that conferred significant privileges. After reconsideration, the old man finally agreed to let him go up. They thanked him gratefully and took a seat in the wagon. As they settled in, the old man asked them where they were going. He hesitated, realizing that he had left in a hurry, without a plan, but knowing that the dark mages might soon be after him, and that they would kill him to prevent any information from leaking out. He had no choice but to head to the one place where people might still want him dead, but which was also the safest place Ardal Academy could think of. As he mentioned in the novel he had read, this was the beginning of his new journey. At Ardal Academy, a girl was running toward the building. It was Celine, a second-year assistant teacher, marveling at the academy's plush marble floors and elegant chandeliers. Even the students' uniforms exuded an air of refinement as he greeted the students. His gaze stopped abruptly as he saw someone get out of a dusty old cart surrounded by a cloud of dust. He came downstairs, his robe tattered and his expression weary. Celine couldn't believe what he saw in his eyes and almost fainted from fear. Horrified at the sight of someone so misaligned entering her pristine academy, she wondered how such a student had ended up there, and looked at him with disdain. Our protagonist, now feeling refreshed by the clean air, did not notice the teacher's reaction. Celine was worried that this Yanzio boy might tarnish the reputation of the academy on the first day of the semester. He remembered that Hansio was a student he had almost dropped out of school, due to his inability to control his innate magical talent. Meanwhile, the boy kept his cute reptile hidden inside his tunic. Although the dragon was restless and eager to get out, upon noticing the frantic teacher, he quickly evaluated her and deduced that she must be a teacher given her appearance and behavior. Approaching her, I asked her if she was late. She confirmed that she did not think he deserved her attention and that he was not worth worrying about a helpless failure. He remembered the rumors about him, stories of his creepy obsession with black magic and the strange claim that he hugged a voodoo doll every night. She thought getting involved with him would only bring trouble, patting him on the shoulder. She urged him to come in quickly. Despite her cold attitude, he thanked her with a soft, bright smile. His unexpected warmth. I stunned her as I watched him enter the academy. As a second-year teacher, she realized that her perspective had changed. Once inside the classroom, he immediately attracted the attention of his classmates, who murmured and gossiped about him. They labeled him odd, noting his recent entry into the wagon and his disheveled appearance. Despite the whispers, he remained calm, reflecting that he was probably doomed. He sat alone in the back, listening to his classmates speculate that he must have advanced to the second year, thanks to some kind of favor from a teacher. He wondered if his family had bribed someone to advance, if a teacher had recognized some hidden potential in it, or if a magic tower had written a recommendation. But he quickly dismissed these thoughts, deciding that his priority now was to figure out how to survive in this treacherous world. Using his own strength, he divided his survival goals into two main objectives. First, he needed to find a quiet place to survive, although he hadn't discovered that sanctuary yet, so it wasn't an immediate concern. As a third-rate villain, known to be violent and incompetent, he knew he risked a bloody ending, possibly being buried alive by the protagonists. This worried him especially because the Academy's closure for the year meant he had some time. Although the exact reason for his character's death remained unclear, it could be due to unsolved escapades, or other crimes of which he was not aware. Determined to avoid such a fate, he resolved to live quietly and cautiously, preferring to work hard and die a natural death rather than suffer a brutal death. His second plan was to graduate safely, adjust and forge a life. In this new world he sought to secure his future, recognizing that although his family was rich, he had been disinherited due to his past behavior. Obtaining a diploma would be a reliable way to secure a stable future and earn a living. He decided that, rather than tangling with the protagonists and risking his own death, he would rather live quietly like an ordinary student, resolving to do everything possible to block every scenario that might bring him to an end. He prepared himself mentally for the challenges ahead. When the professor arrived, the class greeted him. As a whole, the students murmured about the intense aura that the professor exuded. He recognized the professor as Green from the magic department. As he tried to relax, his classmates expressed concern that his exams this semester would be difficult. Commenting on how intimidating the professor was, Professor Grinch quickly silenced him, acknowledging that the students who had advanced to the second year were quite impressive. He mentioned that he had noticed some students whose sharp gaze stood out scanning the classroom as he spoke. He agreed with Professor Grint, recognizing that the presence of promising students, including the protagonist of the original story, raised the overall quality of the academy. He couldn't help but feel that this made the conditions quite unfavorable for him, as the academy rules felt like a Jeopardy game, with every decision potentially leading to his downfall. The Ardell Academy accepted students between 14 and 19 years old, and was known for its rigor. Thanks to its promising students, winning numerous competitions, the academy had become a kind of competitive arena. However, only about 10% of students managed to graduate with honors, which he found discouraging. Given the intense level of competition, he wondered how he could compete with the protagonist, who in the original plot was rapidly growing in power within the black magic organization. Since he planned to live quietly, this seemed almost impossible. At that time, Professor Green announced that many students did not meet the required standards, and that those who did not have the necessary skills would not be admitted to his class. He felt as if he had received a hard blow, especially when the professor's serious gaze seemed to rest directly on him, scrutinizing him. After announcing the opening exam schedule, Professor Green hit the ground with his cane, causing an illusory screen to appear before them. He was stunned. His expression reflected astonishment at the sophisticated level of the spell. The screen indicated that, based on his experience from the previous year, he needed to freely choose both written and practical exams in those areas. He was impressed by the top-notch magic used by the academy, but quickly realized that being able to choose exam subjects freely could be advantageous if he played his cards right. However, he suspected that it would not be so easy. Sensing that there might be an unexpected twist, Professor Green then announced that he himself would take the balls with the students' names out of a box to determine the order. Hansio thought to himself that depending on luck for the exam was unfortunate, feeling that fate was playing another cruel trick on him. Given his current lack of knowledge of magic, he knew his only option was to choose subjects early to manage his grades. He couldn't shake the feeling that his luck had already run out in escaping the dark wizards, and he wondered what to do. Then, when the professor took a ball out of the box, he announced that the first person to choose his subjects would be him, surprised and relieved. At the same time, he thought that perhaps his luck hadn't run out entirely. As he reviewed the available subjects, he realized that, given his ignorance of magic, he should avoid practical subjects and anything related to necromancy, just as the story mentioned. However, As he scrolled through the list, all the subjects seemed difficult, making it difficult for him to find a suitable option. Finally, one subject caught his attention. Exploration of arithmetic and magic formulas. Although the name sounded intimidating at first, he decided it was the most manageable option available. He figured since he was good at memorizing, he could handle it somehow. His classmates murmured about his choice, pointing out that arithmetic was considered difficult among the options, and were relieved that he had chosen it. With the conversation buzzing around him, he quickly chose his other two subjects, noticing that one of them also seemed viable. The scene moved to the library, where he studied in silence. Reflecting on his past, he remembered that before coming to this world he had worked as an intern in veterinary medicine, and the subjects he chose were somewhat similar to his specialty in veterinary sciences. He decided to focus first on exploring arithmetic and magic formulas, recognizing that although arithmetic methods were unique in this world, his existing knowledge of mathematics might not be of much help. Here. After finishing his studies in arithmetic, he moved on to a book titled Anatomy of Monsters, an introduction to basic taming and behavioral science. He was so immersed in his studies that he momentarily forgot his pet hidden in his bag. As other students passed by, they began to suspect and pry. Over the moving bag, it became increasingly difficult to ignore the stares, especially as her cute dragon tried to get out. Worried about drawing too much attention. Because of his appearance, he gently pushed the reptile back into the bag, with too many prying eyes around him. He had no choice but to leave the library. He recognized that as someone who struggled with the control of magic, taming a newborn dragon could raise suspicion and attract unwanted attention. He promised himself to be more cautious in the future. After leaving the library, he headed to the underground training area of the academy. There he told his cute dragon that he could run free and behave like a wild beast, assuring him that the area was a safe place. Believing he had understood the theory to some extent, he thought it would be a good opportunity to practice his taming skills. Approaching a staff member at the training camp, he asked for an entrance ticket to the beginner practice area. The surprised staff member looked at his cute dragon and commented that it was a newborn. He expressed his astonishment that he had brought a dragon there. Then, when he asked the dragon's name, he realized with surprise that he hadn't named it yet. He asked the dragon what his name was. The cute dragon, scratching its head in confusion, finally made a cheerful sound. He took it as a cue to choose a name for his pet, and the dragon seemed to agree. As he pondered, the dragon was frustrated with his indecision, his aura intensifying. He suggested names like Carcharodontosaurus, thinking they were the coolest names he could think of. However, the reptile's gaze made it clear that if he didn't choose a good name, soon he might just do it on the spot. Realizing the gravity of the situation, he decided to carefully choose a unique and appropriate name. After some thought, he finally chose Bacillus. The reptile's expression brightened at once at the name, indicating its approval. The girl registered the name and informed him that the training area could accommodate up to 2 people, mentioning that there was currently another person in another room. After this, he saw him go to the gun room, explaining that it was a rental service available to students, as he noticed that the guns looked quite worn, probably because they were free. He decided not to be picky, reasoning that he needed to strengthen himself and that he should be grateful for what he could get. He selected a shield and a wand. Once prepared, the girl led them to the door of the beginner practice area. When he opened it, he felt a mixture of worry, wonder, and excitement inside. He was amazed to find that the place resembled a beautiful garden, as they explored Aveston's slame and commented that even low-level monsters seemed to be created somewhat carelessly. He asked Basilisk if he saw the lames, and when he received confirmation, he coldly declared his intention to blow them to pieces. Basilisk, stunned and surprised by his master's ruthless intention, trembled in disbelief, but had no choice but to obey. Basilisk advanced and annihilated the lames. As he watched, he noticed that Basilisk seemed to enjoy playing with these monsters, perhaps a sign that the dragon's instincts were awakening. While Basilisk devoured the lames, he wandered around the area, noticing that Basilisk was fine. Realizing that he also needed to practice and improve his skills, he decided to take this opportunity to strengthen his skills. As he went deeper, he heard the loud echoes of the beasts and suddenly felt an attack coming from behind. He whirled quickly, stunned, but able to react in time by raising his shield to defend himself. Seeing them in groups, he realized that his own strength would not be enough to defeat them all. However, with Blue Basilisk and a solid strategy, I could take them down one for one at the right time. Just as he was formulating a plan, Basilisk, having finished with the previous lanes, met with him, asked Basilisk if he had stretched enough, and then outlined his plan. They would repeat the strategy they had used before. Responding to the order, Basilisk unleashed his flamethrower on the approaching monsters. A powerful explosion of destructive force emanated from Basilisk, and the monsters disintegrated into dust. He was astonished. I didn't expect Basiliscus to become so powerful so quickly. Impressed, he praised Basiliscus and encouraged him to continue, vowing that they would continue to improve their skills and train like crazy. Noon passed, and they were both lying on the ground, exhausted. He commented that while practicing his magic, he had constantly alternated between taming Basilisk and casting offensive spells, which had left him completely exhausted. He joked, saying he felt like he could really die from the intense training. Watching his pet, he noticed that Basiliscus had been listening remarkably well. He promised that when they returned to the dormitory he would give Basilisk something delicious to eat. Just then he noticed some commotion downstairs and went to investigate. He gave one of the students mentioned earlier by the girl who had been training in the area. At first it looked like her beast was playing with mud while she knelt in despair, clearly frustrated by her beast's refusal to obey her face. It was a mixture of anger and frustration, ready to explode at any moment. After a moment, the girl calmed down and stood up. Determined to try again to command her beast, Adele did her best, but it was clear that the creature did not feel comfortable with her. The hellhound remained cautious and barked in defiance. Meanwhile, Hans watched himself struggle to tame the beast, muttering that his approach was incorrect. I thought I shouldn't treat the animal that way. The girl was shouting for the beast to come back and sit down, but the beast ignored her and ran away. Frustrated, Adele chased after him, muttering angrily that the bastard wasn't listening to her and vowing that she would regret it if she caught him. While searching for his disobedient pet, he noticed something surprising. His problematic hell dog had become docile, and was now obediently sitting next to Hansia. He approached them with a determined step, wondering how Hansia, a sophomore with a reputation for failure, had managed to take his pet so easily. Noticing her approach, he asked her if the beast was her pet, and mentioned that he had been observing her efforts for a while. He then advised her that her approach to taming the beast was incorrect. Adele looked at him, confused and deflated. Hansia explained that when a tamer gets carried away by emotions, it only stirs the beast more. Adele was surprised. She couldn't believe Hansia was giving her advice. At Ardell Academy, the most prestigious school in the Empire, Adele, an earth mage, had never ranked lower than third. Despite his humble origins, and the many challenges he faced, few could match his skill. However, because the opening exams were taken by lottery, Adele ended up taking the subject in which she was weaker. Introduction to basic shooting. He knew very well that his taming skills were poor, that's why he was there practicing. But what puzzled her most was Ansia, the boy who couldn't even tame a Zahim last year, a failure she'd witnessed with her own eyes. There were also rumors that he was obsessed with black magic, and had always considered it a dark, inferior, hopeless affair. Yet here he was successfully taming his hellhound, making his usually defiant pet almost obsessed with him. Astonished by this turn of events, I asked her how she had managed it. He simply replied that his beast was no longer agitated and that he could take it back. Grateful for the advice, Adele picked up her hellhound and thanked him. Curious, he asked her why she had chosen a hellhound, pointing out that it was a great challenge for a novice tamer. She proudly explained that a difficult monster like the hellhound was of high value to her, especially since it was her first attempt at the matter. She wanted to prove herself, and he understood her reasoning. Hansia joked that she thought she would prefer a less challenging pet, maybe one that enjoyed mud baths or something, which made Adele get annoyed by his teasing. As he watched him more closely, his eyes settled on the creature next to him, a newborn dragon. What surprised him most was that Hansia had already tamed him, something strange for someone of his level as a sophomore. It was as if Hansia had become a completely different person. After that they headed together to a place where the Imses were known to gather on block. Adele checked twice to confirm they were in the right place. She couldn't believe that he would have suggested that area as a place where she could practice and improve her cooperation with her beast, helping them become more familiar with each other. When he confirmed that they were in the correct place, Adele got to work, pushing aside the vines and grass, revealing a group of slam blocks hidden in the area. It looked like a spawn point. While inspecting the place, He mentioned that he had almost finished with the 6 before, but that they had reappeared quickly. Hearing this, Adele told him not to worry. Drawing his sword confidently, he commented that he could finish them off with one blow, ordered him to stand aside as he prepared to fight the lame. The lame attacked as soon as they saw her, but with a single stroke of her sword, Adele annihilated them all, leaving a deep destructive mark where she had struck. Seeing this, Hansi was a little impressed, although he couldn't resist the temptation to mock, commenting that his aggressive method seemed exaggerated, practically burying the lames alive. Hearing this, Adele's face furrowed with anger and she looked at him. Ominously, however, he managed to control his emotions, responding with a forced calm and pretending to ignore his comment. Meanwhile, a slain had survived and was sneaking up on her. To her surprise, he used magic to obliterate the slain. Adele couldn't believe it, she clearly remembered that he couldn't use magic properly. Surprised, she lost herself in her thoughts while he casually asked her if she hadn't noticed him behind her. Still stunned, she stammered an excuse, trying to claim that she had known all along, but hadn't reacted before he could finish his sentence. He started calling his cute bacillus to keep telling him that they needed to go. She added, almost casually, that it was a relief if she had actually noticed Alsan as he walked away in the background. Adele realized the truth, she had not felt Alsan approaching from behind. He also noticed that Hansia's spell, her magic arrow, had a level of accuracy far higher than he would expect from a beginner. Just as he started talking, his words were interrupted by a sudden mistake in the dungeon, triggering an emergency alarm that echoed throughout the place. They both went on alert instantly. He asked her if she knew of any devices that could have caused this, but she was as baffled as he was. While they were trying to figure out what was going on, a man in the director's office informed the honorary director of the emergency in the training camp dungeon. Upon hearing this, the headmaster asked if there had been an error with the spell and asked for details about the current situation within the dungeon, including which students were present. The man replied that there were 2 students inside, one of them being Hansia. Upon hearing Hansia's name, the director sighed and commented that Hansia was a known troublemaker, hinting that even if the boy died, it would not be a great loss. However, he pointed out that the other student, a girl named Daly, was different. She was promising and talented, and her safety was a concern. The warden lamented Jansia's lack of talent or skill, speculating that she would probably perish in the bug-ridden dungeon. He explained that if there was a flaw in the magic formula of the dungeon, the monsters could grow abnormally large and much stronger than usual. He emphasized again that Hansia had virtually no chance of survival, and advised staff to prepare mentally for the worst. Back in the dungeon, Hansia and Adele seemed fine for the moment, having managed to defeat several monsters. Here, however, the situation worsened. The monsters continued to appear without showing signs of stopping. Adele became more and more frustrated, exclaiming that the monsters were becoming more terrifying, and that the place had become hell in an instant. He screamed more that there seemed to be no end to the incessant reappearance. In his exasperation, he swore he would never look at a slame again, referring to the endless horde as slame salad. While she panicked, Hansia found his words somewhat amusing. Though he couldn't ignore the growing worry that plagued him, he noticed that while Adele looked exhausted by the incessant waves of monsters, she still looked surprisingly composed. He commented almost to himself that although his taming skills were amateurs, his sword prowess was on par with the pros. He began to wonder if she could be the earth mage destined to become a great sorceress or, more accurately, a great sword mage. Hansia couldn't help but find it strange that someone as fearsome as Adele was having difficulty in a beginner's practice area. Thinking of earth wizards, the term sword wizard was fairly common. Despite Adele's explosive temper, Hansia found it remarkable that she didn't look at him with disdain. I admired his personality, considering his character quite impressive. As she pondered this, Adele noticed that he seemed distracted, not paying attention to the monsters, and seemingly relaxed while she did all the hard work. He thought Hansia was a little weird and asked her why he was feeling for himself instead of helping with the fight. Still lost in his thoughts, he commented that they had been there for more than 3 hours and wondered why there had been no response from outside to help them. No one seemed to know there was a problem, which would explain the lack of response. Adele replied that it couldn't be avoided, since they had only spent about 30 minutes outside. Time moved slower inside the dungeon than outside. He added that this was actually an advantage for them, as it gave them more time to train. Hearing this, Hans understood why there had been no answer yet. He added that even if rescuers knew the situation and were on their way, they would still have several hours to resist. They would have to endure and keep fighting the Imma monsters until help arrived, which seemed almost impossible. As she listened to his words, Adele's temper flared up again. He demanded to know why he had to say such unfortunate things as if they were just sitting there, waiting to die. He replied sarcastically that he would never do that and seemed oddly pleased with himself as he said so. As they argued, Hanxia suddenly smiled and told him to buy her some time. Confused, Adele asked him what he was planning, but he only told her that he would know when the time came. Then he asked her to keep the monsters there away, assuring her that it wouldn't take long to do what she needed to do. Frustrated, she demanded to know why she had to handle it alone, and asked what he was going to do in the meantime, but she ignored her, and began to execute her plan. As Adele watched him walk away, her expression grew more angry and irritated. He felt an inner satisfaction, confident that his initial judgment of her was correct. Meanwhile, Basili seemed worried about Adele, but Hanxia reassured him by telling him that she had everything planned. As he walked, he felt bright lives emitting. Lucy mentioned that she had read about those lives in the story and knew how to handle them. According to the original novel, Era's dungeon was meant to highlight the differences in skill between protagonist Ian and Hanxia. Hanxia had tried and failed spectacularly in this part of the dungeon that involved dealing with those lives. Now, pleased to have found them, he instructed Baslis to seek out more of these unique lives, collect them, and bring them back. Baslis studied the vines carefully and flew to find them. While Baslis was busy collecting lives, Hanxia reflected on the negative treatment her character had received from readers in the original story. He remembered how Hanxia had used this method and had been cursed, like a stupid loser and an evil fellow. Holding a unique life in his hand, he commented that he did not believe Hanxia deserved such abuse. Meanwhile, Adele was handling the items well, but her mana was running out. Frustrated by Hanxia's delay, she demanded to know it was taking her so long and cursed him under her breath. Just as she was reaching her limit, he suddenly appeared shouting that he was done. Adele turned, surprised and a little confused to see him inside the barricade of vines. He motioned for her to hurry inside. Although Adele was a little confused and suggested that they move in quietly, since the lime regenerated so quickly, Hanxia insisted that she go in immediately. Once inside, he explained his plan to build a defensive wall and kill the monsters outside it using amplification, magic and fire. I assure you this method would stop the regeneration of the lames and cause them to evaporate. Confidently he cast a spell creating a large green arrow with arrow magic. He added that the final step was to set the arrows on fire. Turning to Baslis he said, "It's your turn now." Baslis's eyes sparkled as he began to light the flaming arrows. Then he hurled the sowing arrows outside his barricade, where the Lane monsters, startled by the bright projectiles, met their end with a great explosion. The beautiful bright arrows similar to fireworks, or iterated the inns in an instant. Adele, upon witnessing the creation of Hanxia, was amazed and could not believe what she was seeing. She wondered if this was really the Hanxia she knew as the IMSS evaporated and failed to regenerate. He explained that when he buried the IMSS and scattered the remains on the ground, the slame's poison had the property of exploding when exposed to fire magic. Adele, impressed but wary, asked him if he had also planned to prevent the rain of fire from reaching the interior of his barricade. He smiled and replied that it was a good observation, but assured her that the lives he used for the barricade were not ordinary, that they were resistant to fire and immune to flames. With everything around him burning and the eradicated lanes only had to wait for him to come to their rescue. Feeling that the situation was finally under control, Hanxia felt relief. Adele looked at him thoughtfully, reflecting on how unlikely it was to be saved by someone like he considered. Like most nobles at Artel Academy, they had no concern for the lives of commoners. So he wondered if Hanxia had an ulterior motive. Noticing her deep thoughts, he asked her what she was thinking and why she was looking at him that way. With a touch of mockery, he assumed that perhaps she wanted to thank him for saving his life. Despite his grumpy attitude, Adele was kind and admitted that she was actually grateful, if only a little because she owed him her life. On hearing this, Hanxia commented that it was good. Then he asked if I could do him a favor. Adele, suddenly worried and hesitant, wondered what the favor might be. He felt that if it was something that could be easily done he would not hesitate, but if it was a strange request, he could refuse it. Before Adele could finish her words, he interrupted her by telling her that he needed to keep everything that happened in the dungeon a secret. He asked her to keep everything confidential, take the beast, capture the errant slave in one fell swoop, and build the barricade with the vines. Adele realized that her suspicion was correct, but something still seemed strange. She couldn't shake the feeling that Hansia was hiding something, thinking of him as a mysterious bastard with secrets, as she watched him pick up some science spheres. Afterwards, the cleaning of the dungeon was handled loosely. The two teachers, who had been confused by the sudden mistakes in the dungeon, decided to reward the students who had resolved the situation without serious injury. Following this event, Hansia was summoned to the dean's office to receive a generous reward while sitting comfortably in the office. He seemed relieved, though he mentioned that he understood the value of rewards and how they could be used. However, he did not seem particularly interested in them. His priority was to strengthen himself and his cute beast with the dean absent. Hansia and Basilis were alone in the office. He called to Basilis, who approached happily with a bright smile on his face. As Basili approached, Hansia checked his condition. The screen showed that Basilis Atreides was a red dragon, always cheerful, very serious about cheese, and quite friendly with Hansi. It also showed that Basilis' flamethrower ability had increased significantly, and that he had acquired a new ability, toxicity resistance, during his encounter with the dungeon bug. Hansia, in a thoughtful tone, told himself that he wasn't sure what the Dark Wizard organization was up to, but he knew that Basilis had come from the basement, which implied a connection between the organization and this place. Despite everything, he claimed that his adorable Basilis was not only a valuable dragon, but also a cub with extraordinary talent and potential. She praised him for his rapid growth, his precise breath control, and his immense magical power, leaving him even more amazed at how truly overwhelming Basilisk was in every way. He was determined to create it properly, even if it meant breaking a sweat. Then he turned to Basilisk and told him that they had gone through a lot to get the Slame Spheres. Holding one of them, he explained that it was a very powerful object, and with a smile he asked Basilisk if it looked delicious, playfully suggesting that he should try it. But Basilisk looked disgusted and reluctant, as if he thought the sphere was poisonous. Despite Basilisk's reluctance, Hansh encouraged him to try it, assuring him that it was safe and that eating one or two would not be fatal. After some hesitation, Basilisk finally tasted the sphere, but to his horror he found the taste so unpleasant that he immediately vomited it up. Watching this, Hansia realized that the taste must be absolutely terrible. He hadn't tasted the sphere and didn't know what it tasted like. Still, he smiled as he noticed that, despite the horrible taste, Basilisk's statistics seemed to have changed. It seemed that his magical power and resistance to toxicity had increased after consuming the sphere. Slame's sphere was an object that amplified consumer stats, and with just one sphere he was able to improve even basic monostats that usually took a long time to improve. However, to his surprise, Basilisk became addicted to the spheres, consuming them all as if there was no tomorrow. As Basilisk devoured the spheres, his stats increased rapidly. Hansi was pleased, lying back and enjoying the sound of the notification bells that felt like a reward. Just then, someone knocked on the door, wondering who it might be. He opened the door and found Adele, who burst in calling him by name in an intense tone. However, he was only joking and quickly returned to his usual kindness. Adele explained that she had been looking everywhere for him, and had finally found him in the dean's office. Hansia wondered if Adele had been summoned here to receive something too. Adele then demanded to know if she really didn't mind giving him all the credit for dealing with the error monstrous lame, hinting that this would make her better known and result in her receiving more items than him. He asked her if she really agreed with that. Scratching her head, Hansia replied that she didn't care about the credit, but asked her to lower her voice because her ears hurt from speaking so loudly. He thought that life was more important than those objects, and that if rumors spread about clearing the dungeon, it might attract unwanted attention from the Dark Organization. This could lead to his death if they found out he was living well and freely. She also didn't want to be famous like the protagonist Adele, showing a surprising amount of sympathy. She said that if that was the case, she should keep it a secret because she didn't want fame either. The atmosphere grew tense and Hansia couldn't help wondering why she was being so understanding. He suddenly told her that he didn't need sympathy from someone he didn't know and asked her not to mention it again. Adele, surprised for a moment, approached angrily and demanded to know how he could claim that he didn't know her, asking why he didn't. Hansia, apparently irritated, covered her ears, complaining that his speech was like a machine gun. He sarcastically asked if he was supposed to know her and asked her name. When Adele introduced herself as Adele Stevia, Hansia's jaw dropped in SOP. He immediately recognized the name, confirming that she was in fact the great mage of plebeian origin, who had consistently occupied the top 3 positions in the academy. He was also the same character as in the original story. She'd buried him cruelly alive. Realization hit him hard. This was the person destined to end his life in the future. Panic seized him as he felt the weight of his grim fate. Overthinking the situation, he worried that his head might explode from stress, muttering to himself that he was going crazy. Because of this misfortune, Adele, noticing his state of paranoia, asked him if he ever looked in the mirror. Then she led him to a nearby mirror so he could see his reflection. He commented that he couldn't imagine someone like him going to the dean's office to receive an object given its current state. It was the first time since he had been reincarnated in Hanxia's body that he had seen her reflection, and was surprised by her dirty and disheveled appearance. He commented on how incredible it was that he didn't look like the handsome man he'd imagined, realizing that people avoided him, not out of fear, but out of disgust. He decided that despite everything, he would remain confident and make some changes, starting with fixing his hair and improving his overall appearance. The next day, in the classroom, he made a grand and unexpected entrance. Upon entering, his classmates began muttering about him, wondering if he was a new student. They speculated that the handsome man must be a new student, a transfer, though he looked familiar. Some of his classmates recognized him, noting that he was in fact Hansia, not a new student, but his appearance had changed drastically. Others commented that he looked like a completely different person as he sat down. The murmur continued. He joked to himself that he must be handsome enough for everyone to be talking about him. Suddenly, one of his companions, a young red-haired man named Craig, asked him if he had received any type of polymorphism treatment, expressing his desire to become so handsome, and asking him to share the secret. Hansel thought of Craig, who came from a commoner background, and seemed eager to give him orders. However, since he was no longer the same person, he was not going to be intimidated. While Craig kept making fun of him, calling him a pathetic loser. While he ignored it, the situation escalated. He thinks he implied that cutting his hair had made him lose his head. Hanskia, who harbored a strong dislike for people with talking mouths, decided that she could no longer tolerate this behavior. He calmly warned Creek that if he did not stop talking, he would have no choice but to silence him. Creek, unflinching, replied that he was old enough to talk, especially since he had been abandoned by his own family. Hansia responded by advising him to believe he wasn't talking big. Baseless, who then emerged from his bag, emanating a dominant aura. Craig was astonished to see Basilisk, while the other students whispered among themselves, wondering if he was a real dragon, and how an ordinary student could possess such a creature. Craig raised awkwardly and turning to Sayansia, commented that he had heard that he had been kicked out of his family. He added that despite that, he seemed to have a lot of money to spare, and then asked him sarcastically if he really thought he could tame a dragon just by spending a fortune. Hansia had planned to live cautiously and quietly, but she also remembered that she had never said she would live quietly while being harassed. Then he called Craig a dumb prebello, which infuriated Craig like never before. Furious, I thought, he shouted, demanding to know what he had said. Hansia was pleased to see that Craig had fallen for provocation so easily, thinking to himself how incredibly profitable it was to make someone lose their composure with just 2 words. He mockingly told Creek that no matter how young Baselist was, a dragon would never remain so docile unless it had been tamed. Then she asked him if he was afraid it would actually bite him. Seeing Creek, he gritted his teeth in anger. Hansa reassured him not to worry because he was not so immoral. Creek, unable to contain his fury, demanded to know if Hansa was serious, and didn't even know his own limits. Calmly, Hansa replied that if he was so upset he should do something about it. Immediately silence fell in the room. Then he added that when the grades of the entrance exam were published, they would see who would emerge victorious. Later, Hansia remembered Creek's outburst when he shouted that if he defeated him, he would bark like a dog and call him a bastard. Hansia was pleased with how easily the bet had been resolved and thought that now she just had to wait and see the bastard, of believing that barking, just as in her previous life, had always been good at fixing things after causing a mess. In those days they called him the scum intern because he always faced injustices and never backed down. As he walked down the hall, a man shouted at him asking if it was true that he had bet against Craig. In disbelief, the man asked him how he dared to think he could beat Craig on the exam, when he would be lucky if another man even passed it. Joining the conversation, he asked him in a mocking tone if they could expect to see him bark like a clearly annoyed dog. Hansia wondered if there were always people in all worlds who wouldn't leave him alone, even when he was doing things right. Then he turned and demanded to know the names of the men. One of them asked him why he cared, but Hansia simply told him to shut up and answer the question. Surprised for a moment, the man finally replied that his name was Fabian Danavin, and asked if he had not heard of him. Hansi then remembered Edwin as the arrogant prince who used his position to manipulate the weakest, basically the leader of those who maliciously bullied him in the original novel. Without hesitation, she opened her bag where Basilisk rested and ordered him to take care of Edwin for real. Edwin, now terrified, watched as Basilisk, who initially looked at him tenderly. Suddenly he leapt toward them. The two men fled in terror. Days later, Hans was already training with Adele. When she mentioned that the rumors about him were spreading like wildfire, he asked him if he didn't think it would be better for his well-being not to mess with the royals, but he just replied that he didn't care, since those guys started it, and he was just getting revenge. Adele, who originally thought he was just a nobleman taking it out on commoners, began to view him with a little more tolerance, but still told her he was a lost cause. Then he asked if all the nobles were completely lacking in common sense, pointing out that not only had he unleashed his dragon against some boys, but he had also made a bet with Creek. He added that trying to beat Creek on an exam using raw, unrefined magic was madness, reaching out his hand to help him to his feet. Adele asked him what would have happened if she hadn't been there to assist him. Hans accepted his hand, reminding him that she was also learning about creature taming from him in exchange for evaluating his magic. But Adele just told her to forget it and mentioned that her practice match was her last. He added that he could beat her. There he could also beat Craig. Hansia, with confidence, replied that this time he would not be expelled as easily as the day before. Adele then used her earth magic to rise off the ground while Hansia protected herself with the special training sessions. With Adele finished, time passed and finally came the day of the entrance exam. After Adele's impressive performance, Green introduced her as a student majoring in magic, announcing that she had completed the exam in 5 minutes and 31 seconds within her grade. Adele, excited, thanked Green and praised her hellhound who watched from the side. Hansia thought it was amazing how someone who had initially fought only one hellhound had managed to tame it so perfectly after only a little teaching. Despite her experience and memories of her past life, Adele's first attempt at taming was remarkable, proving that she really was a prodigy and a major character. Then Green called Hansia and announced it was her turn. He nodded, indicating he was ready. The entrance exam for taking subjects took place inside a magic cube, where virtual monsters corresponding to their level faced off against the creatures that the students had tamed. The goal was simple: win the fight. Green told him that he would use the Psi Cube, and that's when the exam began. When the monster began to materialize in front of him, Hansia recognized it immediately. It was an adapter. He knew from his past life experience that the adapter was a snake-shaped monster that Yehan had first encountered in his 3rd year. The enormous size and imposing presence of the creature capable of killing with a single blow coincided exactly with the description in the novel. Calmly, Hansia told Basilisk not to be frightened, which surprised the creature. He then asked if he was eager to test how much stronger he had become since consuming Slame's sphere, adding that they should have some fun, which surprised Basilisk even more. He suggested that they approach the client Ada first, and Basilisk agreed, knowing that snakes generally have poor vision. Hansia shouted at Basilisk to be careful, warning that if they went all out on their attack it could be disastrous. As Hansa used her magic to get the Age's attention, client motioned for Basilisk to approach from his blind spot. Basilisk flew under the adapter's belly to avoid detection. Close to it, he gathered firepower in his mouth. Hans yelled to keep an eye on the adapter. Obeying, Basilisk unleashed flames, mowing down the enemy. The adapter crashed to the ground, eyes bleeding, leaving Grim incredulous. Other students whispered in shock. Grin knew that the adapter was an advanced one monster, with which even a 3rd-class mage would have difficulty in a one-on-one fight. However, Hansia and Basili had easily defeated him in just a few minutes. Grin suspected that the system administrators had forgotten to properly prepare the adapter in the cube, and I consider having the exam for the safety of the students. Hansia then approached Grin, saying that she had taken her time, but had captured the adapter, and asked him if that meant it had happened. Green, now serious, informed him that he had completed the exam in 12 minutes and 36 seconds, earning a grade. This Hansia was stunned, unable to believe what he was hearing. After the entrance exam, Hansya and Adele were walking by when Adele commented that her performance had been impressive, especially since she got a grades in taming studies and placed herself in first place, based on grades alone. He added that his training sessions in other subjects seemed to have borne fruit. Hansyan couldn't deny it, and thought that the problem was his original goal, to be 15th in the entire school. He wanted to maintain a mediocre rank, and live unnoticed, knowing that in the original novel the protagonist had defeated the adapter with one hand. However, he got carried away with the situation, whispering to himself that it wasn't his fault, and wondering why they had included a monster in the exam that he wasn't supposed to defeat, which made Adele notice him talking darkly to himself again. She then asked him how he had done on the arithmetic exam, reminding him that they had taken it that same day. Hansi realized that if the rankings were based on average grades in all subjects, she might be fine, since she had answered correctly. Just one question on purpose because the others were too easy. He casually replied that the exam was more or less. Adele. Then he confessed that he had completely ruined the exam, asking if it wasn't a little too cruel. Hansi realized that Adele was weak in math, even though the level was only high school math, which for him was easy. He considered offering to tutor her to return the favor, but stopped when she mentioned that he couldn't believe they had given them problems that they hadn't even covered in class, and that he couldn't solve any of them. Although worried, he decided not to give it any more thought and let it go. Then Hansi asked aloud if she got one question right should be okay, which led Adele to ask her what she meant. She reminded him that if they lost first place because they got a question wrong, they wouldn't get the scholarship. Then I asked him if he had solved the problem related to the magic circle, making him wonder if it was referring to geometry and vectors. He said he thought he'd solved it, which made her stop dead. Surprised, when he asked her if there was any problem, she told him that it was impossible that she had solved problem 27, since it was the only one that she had not been able to solve. He was stunned, and wondered if it was really that difficult. A science student would laugh at that statement, but he began to panic when he realized that he had indeed solved that problem. Meanwhile, arithmetic problem 27 was mentioned to Professor Debit in the office, pointing out that only one student in the entire school had gotten it right. Debit responded that it couldn't have been a guess, as he had intentionally made the problem so that even a sophomore couldn't solve it. Then he asked who had answered correctly. Selin reported that it was Ansya, and noticed that when grading it was clear that she had deliberately answered all the other questions incorrectly. He commented that the academy certainly had all kinds of students, but it was evident that he had solved the most difficult problem to show his skills. Debe then remembered that he was the student who had also excelled in the recent Doma exam, thinking that he seemed to be someone who carefully considered his future. The next day the rankings for the second-year entrance exam were posted on the bulletin board. Hans pushed his way to the front. Anxious to see Craig's ranking, he found Craig in 32nd place, give or take. As always, as he checked his own ranking, he heard the students around him whisper in shock. When he saw his name in position 11, he turned around and noticed that he thought he was lurking behind him. She approached him and with a serious expression asked him to accompany him outside. There. They were quickly surrounded by students who were amazed that he had actually won. The students murmured among themselves, saying he thought it was over. They commented that Creek had always shown his superiority, bothering easy targets, but they knew something like this would happen eventually. He thinks he was there staring at the ground, unable to keep his gaze. He asked Creek what he thought was 1 plus 10, and called it common. Creek hesitantly said it was 2. He smiled and told her that he was wrong, that he was actually 11th place. With a mocking smile he called him 32 and asked him if he now understood what he did, which he thinks made his fists clench, in a sign of anger. He realized that he thought he was still easily provoked and sighed. Despite his annoyance, he understood that he believes he was just someone who occasionally caused him problems and decided to take advantage of the situation constructively. He gave a small blow to Creek's forehead, who shouted, demanding to know why he had hit him suddenly and assuring that it was not part of the deal. He shrugged, deciding to take that blow as revenge for the problems he thinks he had caused him. When he thinks he warned that if he thought he would end up treating him like a dog he was gravely mistaken, he just told him to shut up. Turning around, he told Creek to meet him later at the unused club in the basement, saying he had something to do. After class, he and Creek found themselves in the unused club. Creek asked why she had brought him there, to which he said it was out of consideration. Then he asked Craig if he really thought it would make him act like a dog in front of the whole school, adding sarcastically if that was something he liked. Cree shouted at me not to be ridiculous and demanded to know what she wanted me to do. Before answering, he asked Craig if he knew who his father was. Confused, Craig replied that of course he knew. His father was Itizo, the founder. The cunning empire and the bloodthirsty count who had annihilated the dark wizards during the Dark Magic War. Craig wondered why he was bringing up the subject and trying to intimidate him with his noble status. However, he sighed, realizing that Craig didn't really understand why he was asking. Craig then remembered that Etisu had a mansion on the Castico estate, confirming that he had indeed been born with a silver spoon. He went on to say that he remembered Craig having a fairly wide network and then ordered him to spread a specific rumor. Craig was stunned, and asked Sok if he really wanted me to tell the students what he had just said. He confirmed this by instructing him to spread the rumor as quickly as possible, not only between his year, but throughout the school. The more extended, the better. Before Craig could answer, he repeated if he understood. Then he abruptly left the room, leaving Craig there with his mouth open, wondering if he had gone mad. The next day, in a luxurious mansion, the butler informed Itisu of the news of his son. Itisu let him in, and asked how his pathetic youngest son was. The butler replied that the situation did not look very favorable. Although Itisu had generously covered tuition and housing expenses, he had cut off all other support, leaving her unable to spend even her own money, and suffering from hunger. Itisu dismissed this, saying that he would not die from it, and that such difficulty was necessary for him to regain his senses. He added that if he spoke blasphemous words about dark magic in front of him again, he would not hesitate to finish him off, even if he was his son. Then, the butler reported that it seemed that he had finally changed his attitude, and obtained an unprecedented grade in the entrance exam. Itisu, skeptical, assumed that it was only enough to avoid last place, but the butler corrected him, revealing that he had actually obtained 11th place. The news surprised Itisu so much that he dropped his pen. The butler continued to inform Itisu of the recent changes in his reputation according to the latest rumors circulating in Ardil. He was now said to be compassionate, straight as a pine, and exceptionally handsome. Itisu was stunned by this turn of events and asked the butler if it was possible that he had blackmailed someone to spread such strange rumors. The butler laughed and assured him that was not the case at all. The butler, in his ever-solemn tone, dropped a bomb on you, sir. One thing is certain. Ansie's changing. This left Itisu in a state of reflection, a strange thing. In it, she began to think about how she had treated her son, especially since the young man had become entangled in dark magic for Itisu. This had been an attempt to set her son on the right path, but now, with the possibility that Ansie was changing, she felt a small relief, though she wouldn't admit it so easily. Itisu, in his role as the stern patriarch, knew that if his son was really turning a corner, it would be big news. After all, Ansie was the sole heir to the Castaka estate. Itisu rose energetically from his chair and slammed his hands on the table. If Ansia is assigned to the magic department at the next promotion ceremony, we will let them know that all financial support will be reinstated, he declared, like I'm closing a business deal. Meanwhile, Ansia was elsewhere, staring at an ATM made of magic stone, her hands shaking as she held her bank book. He had heard that part of his allowance, which had been cut, would be restored, but upon checking, he gave a sum of money that left him speechless. It was such a large amount that he could live comfortably all semester. Excited, he thought that with that money his days of suffering were over. He knew that Itisu valued honor, and suspected that persuading Click to spread favorable rumors. It had something to do with this outcome. I'm definitely a genius, he thought with a triumphant smile. At that moment, Adele approached him and asked him what he was doing standing there like a fool, reminding him that they had to go to the auditorium, because the promotion ceremony was about to begin. Ansie answered quickly with a clear yes, and followed her into the auditorium, aware that at Ardil Academy, sophomores were assigned to a department that suited his attitude. The ceremony promised to be intense. When they arrived in the auditorium, Dean Ernest welcomed them, and announced the beginning of the ceremony. He explained that the students called would go up on stage, and place their hands on the magic dice, a tool that detected each student's innate disposition, and determined their specialization. Ansie remembered that in the original novel, he had naturally been assigned to the necromancy department, where his desire to use dark magic to take revenge on those who had despised him, had been fulfilled, though it ended in miserable defeat. Now he wondered if the dice would give him the same answer this time. As he clenched his fists, Ansie promised himself he wouldn't end up like the character in the original novel. Then Ernest announced that the top scorer on the advance exam was Lin, who aspired to the magic department. Read as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He replied in the affirmative and walked toward the stage as the students around him murmured in admiration at his achievement. Ansi looked at Lin, remembering that he was the protagonist of Soul Academy, and couldn't believe how perfect he looked, as if he had a protagonist bath that made everything work out for him. With a touch of bitterness, Ansi wished he had been reincarnated as a protagonist too, and not as Ansi. Lin took the dice, and the dean announced his assignment to the Department of Magic, which surprised no one. Then Solia Arbinete was called to the stage. The lady with long white hair and violet eyes stepped forward, and Ansi recognized her as the light mage of the original novel, a genius among geniuses and the protagonist's closest ally. Ernest reported that Solia had also been assigned to the magic department, which seemed obvious to Ansi. The assignments continued in rank order, and when Ernest called Seymour, Parker and Journal were assigned to the necromancy and theology departments respectively. Then Ansi heard his name and felt a knot in his stomach. He walked towards the stage nervously, remembering that in 3 years the necromancers of the necromancy department would unite and start a rebellion, taking control of Ardil Academy only to be mercilessly defeated by the protagonist group. As he approached the stage, he begged internally not to be assigned to the necromancy department. He took the dice that began to move on their own, as the students murmured among themselves, Sean speculating if he wasn't destined for the necromancy department, given his past with dark magic. The dice emitted a bright light, changing color as they finished their evaluation. When he showed the result to Ernest, the dean was surprised and announced Ansi was assigned to the magic department. Relief and joy washed over Ansi. After the ceremony, he felt his companions watching and whispering. I could feel their stare. Half the students were curious, wondering how he had ended up in the magic department, while the other half, those who had experimented with dark magic, looked at him with disdain, questioning why he had not been placed in the necromancy department. Adele approached and congratulated him, mentioning that it seemed like they would see each other often in the magic department. Predictably, Adele had also been assigned to the magic department. When he asked her if she expected to be put there too, she, a little embarrassed, admitted that she did. Leaving Ansi stunned, confused, Ansi asked her if that was a problem, to which she timidly replied no, but joked that she should only make sure to use the directional pad when joining the apartment. Adele laughed and annoyed him, saying that if he had ended up in the necromancy department, they would have fought every day, and he would have lost every time. Also, she added that she wouldn't want to hit him every day because he owed her one. Suddenly, someone appeared next to them, and called Ansi. He turned to see who it was and was surprised to find it was Lin greeting him. Lin commented that it looked like they had both been assigned to the magic department, leaving Ansi wondering why Lin was talking to him. He smiled back at Lin though, trying to hide his surprise. Lin then asked him if he had always been interested in the magic department, adding that it was surprising. Mientras hablaba, Lin extendió la mano diciendo que esperaba con ansias trabajar con él, y si sintiéndose un confortable bajo la mirada fija de Lin, dudó, pero finalmente estrechó su mano, respondiendo que él también esperaba con ansias trabajar juntos. Lian then asked if he was feeling alright and mentioned in a low voice that he had heard that Ansi was trapped in a dungeon just before the practical exam. This comment surprised Andy. Lin went on to point out that he found it intriguing. After all, even with Adele present, an ordinary student would not have survived that dungeon of error. Then I asked what kind of magic he used to escape. Ansia was stunned by Lin's words. Knowing that the teachers had decided to keep this incident a secret, he wondered how Lin could know. He was aware that Lin was incredibly meticulous, to the point that it was difficult to read him. In addition, he had the sharp and direct personality, typical of a web novel protagonist. In other words, Lin believed that any evil force must be eradicated. This made Ansi worry, wondering if Lin already suspected that he was a dark wizard who needed to be eliminated. A little later, Ansi was looking at the dorm bulletin board and gathering his belongings, knowing that a new dormitory had been built for the students of the magic department. When Ansi arrived at the new bedroom, he found an interior that almost reached the level of a 5-star hotel. He walked through the hallways looking for his room until he finally located room 203. He opened the door and to his surprise, a man inside startled and shouted, "You are Ansi calmly." Ansi replied that indeed, that was his name and asked why the man was shouting. The man explained that it was because he was now sharing a room with the superstar of the graduation ceremony, the famous sophomore who had made Cricky cry. even more astonishing, he had brought a member of royalty to tears. Ansi suddenly remembered the incident. After the ceremony, Edwin, a young man of royal blood, had begun to quarrel with him, demanding to know why someone like him, of noble descent, had been assigned to necromancy, while Ansi had been placed in the Department of Magic. To shut him up, Ansi had simply frightened him a little, whispering to him that he knew something interesting, that Edwin was still bragging about being royalty, and trying to get everything effortlessly, even though he didn't really have royal blood. Then he'd asked if he was right, which made Edwin stutter. Angie advised Edwin that if he was ashamed of his secret being discovered, it would be best to keep quiet and stop making so much noise. But then Edwin began to cry, babbling that he had not been able to enter the Department of Magic because there was something wrong with him, that was not worthy. Surprised, Ansi had shouted at her, asking why she was suddenly crying. The situation got complicated when other students saw them, and started gossiping, wondering if Ansi had really made a royal cry with just one comment, and how hard it must have been for Edwin to break down like that. Frustrated, Ansi thought Edwin was a useless idiot, and realized that his plan to be a model student and graduate from the academy without problems was probably ruined. With a sigh, he wondered if things would really be okay after all. Ansi's roommate, upon realizing that he had not shown up, finally did. "I'm Juan," he said, adding that he had also been assigned to the magic department. Juan commented to Ansi that it was a pleasure to meet him and joked that, unlike him, Ansi, the famous, had probably never heard of him before. But John was wrong. Ansi did know his name. He remembered that Juan was the protagonist's most trusted ally. Lean, a light-tempered but shrewd individual, highly versatile, and a well-connected informant with a vast network. When Juan noticed Ansi's astonished expression, he asked her what was going on. Ansi just sighed, thinking he seemed to be surrounded by main characters who had played a part in the original Ansi's downfall. Agwan told him it was nothing, but he was not convinced, and asked why he had sighed so deeply, if nothing really happened. Juan then suggested that they take a tour of the bedrooms once Ansi finished unpacking, excitedly mentioning that he had a guide map, adding that exploring together would be more fun, and suggesting that they could call it roommate bonding time. Eagerness exceeded, thinking that it would not hurt to familiarize himself with the place. A little later, they reached the dormitory cafeteria. Juan mentioned that the senior students said it was better to be like him than to have dinner there. Angry, Ansia asked why. Ivan explained that the cafeteria nutritionist liked to experiment with the menu, so you never knew what they would serve every day. That night's dinner, Juan reported, was fire-boar four-leg salad. Ansi, horrified, asked if it was safe for students to eat Juan Rio, and then took him to the open-air magic training camp, explaining that it was a place where students could practice magic freely. However, he warned that if one passed, he could be hit by lost magic and end up in the infirmary. Apparently, at least one student ended up there every semester. Ansi shook her head, commenting that it seemed irresponsible not to have a magical barrier in place. Juan smiled and told him that it was a good idea, mocking that the rumors about Ansi becoming smarter must be true. Ansi simply sighed and suggested that they avoid the training camp altogether, which made it worth laughing as they continued their tour. Ansi realized that although Van often made meaningless comment, she could still get a lot of useful information from him. He confirmed to himself that Van was actually quite useful. After a while, Angie suggested that they return to their room, and Ivan agreed, saying that they had seen enough. But then a dark mist appeared in the sky, which Guan noticed. He wondered aloud if it was going to rain, as the sky was getting darker and darker. Angie looked up and started, recognizing that it wasn't just a storm cloud. Suddenly, it began to rain heavily. Juan commented that something felt wrong, that the rain had started too suddenly, and suggested that they run to the main building to inform a teacher. But Angie grabbed Juan's arm, stopping him, and warned that he was dangerous when he looked confused, but Ansi recognized the scene in front of him. The eerie atmosphere, the grass soaked and turned into vein by the black rain. He realized that it was no ordinary rain, it was impregnated with deadly poison. Just then they heard students screaming, and someone shouted that everyone should go in, saying that they would be safe if they took refuge in the building. Ansi knew the real problem wasn't the fog, it was just a distraction. The real threat was far more dangerous. They heard someone shouting frantically that some students had disappeared. Another student tried to calm the panicked person, and asked who exactly had disappeared. The response was chilling. Adele, from the magic department, and Solia Albinete had disappeared without leaving a trace despite the chaos around them. Ansi remained calm, recognizing this as the beginning of the second main episode, the kidnapping incident in the bedroom. The system showed its mission. Kidnapping incident in the dormitory finds the missing students. The time limit was unknown, as were the reward and penalty for failing. Meanwhile, in the forest, inside a huge tree, two young men were tied tightly by vines. Adele struggled against the bonds, screaming in frustration that they would not come free. She used to be more composed. He told her that he would not waste his energy, explaining that the vines did not seem to come off easily. Adele exasperated, and asked why she usually hadn't mentioned that before. Solia replied calmly that he had been trying to find a weak point, but that he had not yet found a clear solution. Adele, now a little calmer, nodded in understanding, and admitted that she knew what he meant. Then Adele wondered aloud why the person in the black robe had locked them inside that giant tree and left them there. She reflected that she hadn't offended anyone enough, that they wanted to kill her, and she didn't think she was important enough to be a meaningful target. Unlike usual, she was just a commoner with no family, which made her question why she had been attacked. A small smile crossed her face as she remembered being trapped in the dungeon of error, and she wondered what Ansi would have said in this situation. But then she came out of her dream furious that she was thinking of Nancy, someone who wouldn't even realize the terrible situation she was in, and who would actually be sleeping peacefully in the bedrooms. I used to notice the sudden change in Adele's behavior. He looked at her confusedly, and gently reminded her not to waste her strength. Then he used to mention that he had a theory about his situation. The tree they were trapped in seemed vulnerable to light. Adele immediately paid attention as she realized that the black fog covering the sky was the last thing they saw before they were kidnapped. Soli explained that the black fog was an artificial dense cloud designed to block sunlight. She adds that normally, even artificial clouds are designed with spaces to let some sunlight through, unless there is a specific reason not to, but in this case, the sunlight is completely blocked. Adele, with a touch of laughter, asks Solia if he is guessing that the tree is weak in the light, while also thinking about why the sunlight is perfectly blocked. Then he tells her in a playful tone that he expected nothing less from the second highest ranked student in the entire school. He used to decide to act. He explains that the magic that is attacking them and the other students with toxic rain is definitely black magic, and the best counterattack for black magic is light magic, like its earth purification spell. Adele agrees, and tells Solia to leave it to her, remembering that the purification of Solia's land is still at a second-class level. In such a small confined space it might work. He usually focuses his attention on the tree, closes his eyes and exhales deeply to relax. Begin reciting words for the peace, well-being, and blessings of the earth. As he orders the magic, a luminous energy begins to radiate from his body, causing the dead lives around him to sprout with green, healthy leaves. Adele is amazed at the amount of light that Solia emanates and begins to believe it might work, but she doesn't notice the dark magic that is building up behind Solia. Suddenly, dark energy rushes towards Solia demanding that he stop his stupidity. Solia turns in surprise and tries to release all his light magic to repel the dark power, but it's not enough. Dark magic wraps around her tightly, cutting off her light. The tree then taunts Solia by asking him if he really believes his efforts will work. He tells her that as much potential as he has, bringing in just a couple of sophomores won't be enough. He usually begins to feel like he is short of breath as the black fog begins to infiltrate his mind, corrupting his thoughts as if someone is twisting them. The tree's voice becomes more seductive as it offers her a proposal promising to restore her fallen house. This revelation surprises Solia, who listens in disbelief as the tree continues. Do you remember how much you've suffered? Entering the academy after losing everything in an instant, and stubbornly clinging on despite reaching his limits, the tree tells him it has the power to easily revive his house, and asks if that isn't a tempting offer. Under the influence of the tree's hypnosis, he used to start thinking about the fate of his fallen house, but then Adele's voice cuts her trance. Adele screams. She used to ask her if she has lost her mind and reminding her that life hasn't been easy for her either, urging her to pull herself together. Adele then directs her fury at the tree, demanding to know why she started with Solia in the first place, disparagingly calling him a piece of wood, daring him to try to bother her. Instead, the tree responds by acknowledging that although Adele did not cast mind magic directly, her ability to break out of the influence of the fog proves that she possesses exceptional talent. He then offers Adele a proposition. Also Adele, thinking quickly, realizes that if the tree changes its focus towards her, she could usually regain her senses. He also deduces that the magic of the tree is mental in nature, reflecting and eroding his opponent's deepest desires. If they can hold on with sheer willpower, they could get through it. The tree searches Adele's mind for her wishes, but Adele interrupts by shouting that it is time out, and that she has no interest in listening to proposals from a withered tree. He then begs Solia to regain consciousness, thinking that if he can buy some time, they can counterattack with magic. Adele taunts the tree, suggesting it must have a real body somewhere, and tells it not to hide behind the tree trunk. She even accuses him of being a farce, trying to provoke him into revealing himself enraged. The tree roars, asking what Adele said, and unleashes a dark mist to attack her, screaming that her current form is more than enough to take care of her. Adele closes her eyes, knowing she can't avoid the attack, and silently begs for help. Suddenly, lightning strikes the tree in front of her, making him scream in pain. Adele opens her eyes in surprise and sees that the attack was infused with light magic. He briefly wonders if Solia managed to overcome the brainwashing, but then notices that Solia, he is still struggling with it. As someone helps her, Hansi advances by thanking Adele for the clue about the tree's weakness in the light, pointing out how effective it was. Adele is stunned to see Hansi there, helping her to her feet, as she asks him how she found the place and what that massive attack of light was. He simply replies that for someone who has almost just died, that speaks a lot. Then another approaches, explaining that light magic was basic, but they amplified it using a magic amplifier from their Hanxia bag. He then turns to Adele and asks her if she's okay. She says yes and playfully asks him what he thinks of her, insisting that she is perfectly fine. Then he pulls out a sword. There, with a reassuring smile, he hands it over, saying, "Well, I'm glad to hear that. Let's fight." Adele, surprised but determined, accepts the sword. Adele recognizes the practice sword Hansel gave her, the one she used to use for training. He comments that, knowing his personality, he had probably wanted to hit that tree for a while. She was about to be touched by his consideration, but then she added with a smile that she would probably want to bury him alive too. His comment made her explode internally, but she sighs, wondering why she expected anything different from him. He replied that, as he had wished now, there was even less reason to hold back, especially if his opponent was a black wizard. Just then the man in the black cloak emerged from the tree, clearly sore. Hanxia wondered if the tree was finally revealing its true form. The man looked at Hanxia angrily, but Hanxia just asked with a smile, because she was looking at him like that. Did he want me to take out his other eye too? Enraged, the man controlled the roots and threw them at Hanxia, shouting that he would kill him, but instead of attacking directly, the roots moved upward, blocking the space around them, and making the terrain more favorable to the man with his strength. Returning, the man declared that now it was Hanxia's turn to disappear, ordered all her dark roots to attack, calling Hanxia an immature idiot. The fog began to swirl around Hanxia, infiltrating his mind and whispering words to him: insidious, useless, helpless, abandoned by your family, a failed student who won't even graduate in voice, tried to convince him that he was more cut out for black magic. Hanxia recognized the mental attack as an attempt to corrode her mind, however unpleasant. He simply asked the man if that was all he had, leaving the man surprised. Hanxia knew the man was trying to provoke him by absorbing fragments of memories from the original Hanxia, but those words had no power over him. The frustrated man demanded to know why the brainwashing magic wasn't working, when conditions should have been sufficient. Hanxia confidently replied that the man was simply weak, which enraged him even more. Hanxia observed that the man had merged with the tree, becoming one with it. If his memory was correct, the true nature of the monstrously large baobab tree was an ancient lattice tree, a hybrid created by black magicians who improved healthy seedlings to have a strong synergy with their brainwashing magic, enhancing their mental abilities. But Hans knew that the solution was simple. Mental monsters like this often trusted their abilities too much, which made them vulnerable in terms of physical durability. Then Adele shouted, asking if he was right in saying the tree was faint in the light. Adele, busy cutting off the attacking branches, confirmed that it was. Hanxia went on to add that trees are also naturally weak to fire, which made Adele wonder what she was suddenly trying to say. Hanxia then called Basilisk, and told him it was time to leave. Basilisk responded with a sound of agreement. The man in the black cloak, furious, shouted, "How dare you!" and hurled the branches of the tree at Hanxia, but Basilisk unleashed a powerful explosion of fire, successfully burning the roots of the tree. However, one of the branches managed to hit them, crashing them into a tree behind them. Hansia quickly checked Eli's base, and was relieved to see that the impact had been cushioned by the collision, leaving Eli's base safe, as the branches hurtled toward him. Simultaneously, the man shouted that this was not the time to be distracted. Hansi panicked, realizing too late how close the branches were. Luckily, someone cut off the branch just before I could puncture it, instantly cutting it. Adele was nearby, telling him with a smile that she owed him. Once this time Hansia laughed and admitted that she thought she was going to die. Adele then spoke more seriously, reminding him that although they were doing everything possible to remove the branches from the tree, and even though he had struck hard with Basilitz's help, a strong final blow was needed to truly end the battle. He added that Solia seemed to have regained his senses, but they were still just students who hadn't even finished graduation. Facing a powerful black wizard was a crazy situation that they couldn't hope to win, but he believed that if anyone could solve it, it was him. She then asked him if she was wrong, to which he smiled, and said no. The dark clouds over the tree began to disperse, allowing the rain to fall directly on the tree. The man in the black cloak couldn't believe what he was seeing. Hansia had started a fire, and then made it rain again. The man wondered if it was a magic mistake, but he still thought that despite some tricks, a brat is still a brat. He ordered the branches to attack Hansia again, declaring that if the light disappeared, the place would regain its dominion, for which he was grateful. The branches wrapped around Hansia's legs, and the man declared that Hansia was now dead, but Hansia simply laughed in disbelief and asked the man if he had really fallen for the trap. The man scoffed, asking if Hansia was scared and going crazy. In response, Hansia calmly pulled out her wand, sunk it into the branch wrapped around her leg, and activated her lightning magic. Lightning streaked through the branches, spreading rapidly toward the roots of the tree where the man stood. A powerful bolt of lightning struck the man from above, so intense that it blew the branches to pieces, and killed the tree with which he was fused. The man, now desperate, could not accept what had happened. He demanded to know how low-level basic magic could have so much power. The man insisted that the brainwashing magic had taken effect and blamed everything on Hansia. Hansia sighed, thinking these were the cliched final words of a dying villain. He started to walk away but froze as he heard the man murmur something about the need to find the bucket as soon as possible. Hansia turned immediately and demanded to know what the man was talking about, but the man was already dissolving along with the dying tree. Hansia tried to remember, realizing she had heard of the bucket before. It was definitely mentioned in the original play. Just then Solia approached him, asking if her name was Hansia. Surprised, he turned to her as she praised the strategy he had given earlier, commenting that it was impressive. Then he asked if they had anything to discuss. Hansia told Solia that he had heard a lot about her, and thanked her for her earlier help. However, Solia disagreed, saying that she was the one who should be grateful. He reminded her that it was his idea to use the rain to put out the fire and reduce the risk of a fire, as well as to improve simple lightning magic with the wet environment. Hansia acknowledged this, but pointed out that if she hadn't cast the light defense magic at the right time, he would have been electrocuted by electricity. He usually replied that he did it because he also gave the defense orders. Hansia realized that for her to make such judgments and execute bold magic in such a short time, she must already know a lot about how to operate light magic. Meanwhile, Solia was beginning to see Hansia in a new way. Impressed by their strategic thinking, Hansel then asked if they had any idea why the Black Wizard had kidnapped them. Adele responded that, based on their discussion, it seemed the plan was to brainwash them and use them as minions. This revelation made Hansia realize the full scope of the Black Wizard's plan. Kidnapping two of the best students at Ardil Academy and brainwashing them into pawns was actually a formidable plan. He reflected that, if the Black Wizards were skilled enough to try to brainwash Solia, it was clear that he couldn't have defeated them with just basic magic. Basilisk then looked at him with concern, and Hansen assured the creature that it was well and perfectly safe. However, Basilisk was still acting downcast and sad, which led Hansen to ask why she was being so dramatic, when he had nearly broken his back trying to protect him. Adele scolded him, pointing out that Basilisk was worried about him, and another added that, although Hansia's degree is in beast taming, he can be really clueless sometimes. Hansia was surprised by his concern, and realized what it felt like to achieve something as a team. As they surrounded him, he experienced a sense of camaraderie he had never felt before, a sensation new and unusual to him. Adele then demanded his share of the praise, reminding him that he had worn many of the tree's branches, while another babbled, mentioning that he had also protected Solia until she woke up. Hansia smiled and praised everyone, but then remembered that there might be more to this episode than they initially thought. A moment later, as they walked through a dirty swamp, one was complaining about how sticky it was, and wondering why he had followed someone he wanted to explore, only to end up going through such an ordeal. Hansel replied, by reminding him that he volunteered, and telling him to stop complaining. Meanwhile, Adele and Solia decided to rest and recuperate inside the tree. Even though the poison dissipated with the death of the monstrous Hansia tree, knew that wild swamp areas were not yet places where people could traverse comfortably. However, he found the reason why he had to go down there in a hidden place within Sun Academy. Hanskia knocked on the door and it opened, exciting another Hanskia. He knew that in the original story he had found this hidden locket and treasure while he was barely keeping up with the power of light to rescue Solia, but now it was all his and he could do whatever he wanted with it. He gazed happily at the gold inside, thinking that even a pathetic villain like this needed to make a living. After all, who knows when I'd get pocket money again. 1. Equally excited, he asked if this was real and if the treasure had an owner. Hansia replied that even if it had had an owner, it was long dead. The statue at the entrance was an artifact from about 300 years ago. Intrigued, he asked, how did he know all this? He came out of his dream. Hansi replied that it was just general knowledge of history, mentioning that the Cerberus worshipping tribes in this area had established statues like this one to one. Astonished, he asked if that was true. While Baseline was excitedly inspecting the gold, Baseline suddenly made a sound of excitement, confusing Hansia. He turned to see the creature happily embracing a solid gold bar. Laughing, Hansia asked if Basilis had developed a taste for money, but then noticed that the gold bar looked like a block of cheese. He remembered Basilis believably fond of cheese when he'd given him sandwiches before, and wondered if the creature simply had an affinity for all things yellow. Smiling, he told Basilis that he was lucky and could carry anything he wanted. One astonished, he asked if he too could carry something. Hansia said yes within reason. One euphoric, he asked if he was serious and if he really meant it. Hansia nodded. While exploring the treasure, Hansia found a small chest and wondered if it was the one she thought. He remembered that in the desolate world they lived in, where mere survival was more important than luxury, they needed power to survive adequately. It made sense to prioritize items that could increase his power over gold and treasure. He opened the chest knowing that it contained what the original Hansia had obtained after defeating the Black Wizard. As he did so, one leaned closer, curious about the worn object inside. Hansia revealed that it appeared to be a spellbook. One's eyes widened. Realizing that it was a basic black magic spellbook, he shouted for Hansia to put it down immediately, fearing that he might be cursed. 1. Then he asked nervously if Hansia still couldn't let go of her interest in black magic. Hansia reassured One by telling him that what he was thinking was probably a misunderstanding. Then he opened the book, which began to rub in front of him, releasing a bright light. Hansia knew that the book adapted to the user's preferences and was now syncing with a basic spellbook. When the book landed in his hands, he asked One to read the title again. One cautiously looked at the cover and read that it was in fact a book of basic magic spells. Hansia explained to One that the spellbook seemed to change according to user preferences. Whether the Black Wizard had originally placed it there or not, it was incredibly useful. If it contained all the basic magic, it must be worth a lot. He smiled to himself, realizing he had hit the nail on the head. It was not just any spellbook, it was a high-level one that recommended the most necessary magic according to the user's needs, and allowed the user to learn all the spells contained at once, like a scroll. In other words, it was an opportunity to acquire all the basic magic that the students of Ardil Academy had been sweating for the year at once. Hansia reflected that studying could just be a matter of having the right tools, causing One, upon noticing his disturbing expression, to wonder what was wrong with him now. Hansia then suggested that they head outside, but One asked her to wait a moment while she grabbed another bracelet. Hansia agreed, telling him she would take whatever she could as they prepared to leave. Hansia asked Basilis if they should start climbing slowly, mentioning that those at the top must be bored, and Basilis agreed and started walking. Suddenly Hansia heard someone calling him a foreigner. He turned in surprise, but there was no one there. The voice called him alien again, and he began to wonder if he was the only one who could hear it. Then he noticed that the spellbook glowed brightly in his hands, and realized that being called a foreigner was no coincidence. The voice spoke again, telling him that he was the foreigner who had crossed into this world and that all his actions would reshape it. Horrified, Hansia began to understand what the voice meant. It was also confirmed that it was true. His seemingly insignificant actions could end up overturning the original plot. I was never supposed to be there that day. In the original story, he was a character who should not have survived. Hansia realized that if the book she was holding could see all the truths in the speech, then it must be the Book of Prophecy. Carmen knew that Carmen was an absolute prophecy book, no matter how much one tried to deny it. What the book predicted would inevitably happen. He began to wonder if that meant he should refrain from interfering in everything like a foreigner. In this world he should have kept himself isolated from the episodes, but his desire to live well had led him straight to the heart of the academy. Just then, the voice spoke again, telling him that if that was the role he had been given, he should accept it so that he could guide the miracles of the flowing world. The voice warned that if he did nothing, the world would follow a path to destruction. Hansia felt a sudden surge of power within him and wondered what it was before she could understand it. He fainted, wondering if that was the price of listening to the prophecy. Later, when he woke up in his bedroom, he was there visibly relieved. He told her how surprised he had been when Hansia fainted. Suddenly, Hansia apologized sincerely. He then asked if he could rest just a little, assuring him that he was fine. He agreed and said he would go look for something at the convenience store, leaving Hansia alone with her thoughts. As soon as one was gone, Hansia's mind was overwhelmed with complicated thoughts. She realized that her actions had caused a significant butterfly effect, and as a result, the main characters could die. The Dark Mages could win the war, and perhaps in the end, the Ardell Empire could fall into a world on the verge of destruction. He knew he wouldn't survive, and either way it was the worst-case scenario for him. He had initially planned to live in peace for the rest of the story, but now he wondered if that was his destiny. Stir things up. He thought of his past life, where getting involved in matters he should have avoided led him to be enemies, face betrayal, and be driven to despair. He never wanted to live that kind of life again and realized that he had even longed for death at some point. However, if the world was really going to end because of him as a variable, he couldn't just ignore the nasty feeling in his heart. He sat in a state of amazement for 1 minute, looking down and wondering why he was considering all this so seriously. After all, when a similar situation arose, he knew he would face it. Anyway, it was also confirmed that he was the only person who knew how the main story of Soul Academy, a reincarnation and an outsider, would unfold. He craves, but he doesn't crave like that. He was just who he was. It was later revealed that the mastermind behind the kidnapping incident was a dark sorcerer, and the academy decided to keep the matter confidential from the outside world. Despite having ventured recklessly to rescue Dele, and usually without permission, Hansia and one faced consequences for escaping from the academy, but were also praised for bravely rescuing their classmates. Hansia couldn't help but wonder if in the end that would just take more work, and thought it would be better if they just paid them for their efforts. His irritation peaked when he learned that his first assignment for the practical magic class would be a group project. Hansia was exasperated, thinking, "Is this serious? I couldn't believe they were already being assigned a group project." The day after being released from the infirmary, the group project felt like a bus driver dealing with a passenger who evades payment. Hansia knew this was a real experience where they could learn to understand different types of people. He wanted to show how hellish group projects were compared to the Monster House, and understood that these projects were an important part of Soul Academy's practical magic class. He wondered if the task involved returning with items found in each dungeon, and thought about how to explore dungeons of greater difficulty. I could earn extra points. However, he also knew that there was a significant risk of failing and receiving a 0 if they did not complete the task within the short allotted period. Professor Green then told the students to expect excellent teamwork, and to their surprise, he announced that the group formation would be completely his own. This surprised all the students. Green gave them 10 minutes to select the members of his group. Hansia, however, only yawned, finding the situation annoying. "I was hoping a teammate with some sense would just come along and take care of it." As he finished yawning, someone greeted him. He opened his eyes to see Lean in front of him, asking if he would like to be in the same group. Hansia looked at him incredulously, confused by the unexpected offer. The other students began to whisper, wondering why they were reading. He'd asked Hansia if it was because he'd gotten a good grade in Tamer's class. Hansia then asked Lean if she really wanted to do the group project with him. Lean, looking excited, waited for his answer, but Ansia answered flatly that no, that it was a burden. Lian was stunned, and unable to believe what he was hearing, and Ansia could see that the word burden had affected him deeply. Later, back in his bedroom he laughed and asked Ansia how she could refuse so decisively, while Adele, also laughing, said that she didn't expect him to be so ruthless. 1. He then pointed out that other students had come eagerly asking to be in the same group and he had not rejected them. One asked if it wouldn't be an advantage to be in the same group as a genius like Lin and why he had rejected him. Ansia replied that she literally felt like a burden. He added that his current colleagues were comfortable because they had worked with him before. But he knew deep down that this was just an excuse. The truth was, I was afraid. I didn't know what would happen if I got too involved with the main character. Desperate to change the subject, Ansia asked if they were all wearing the new uniforms as he pointed to his red tie. He recalled the details and explained that from the second year onwards the ties and tunics changed depending on the department. Adele, smiling broadly, commented that since they were all wearing the same color, it really felt like they were on the same team. Ansia thought to himself that no matter how leading or outstanding students the boys were, it was still boys to see them laugh and be happy over trivial things. It confirmed that. Then he showed them a sign and suggested that they stop talking nonsense and decide which dungeons to attack. He proposed a difficulty dungeon called the Forest of Ghosts. Adele, however, suggested that aiming for a higher rank dungeon could also be feasible, and mentioned the ranked dungeon to the witch's hut. As an example, Ansia recognized his point, but it occurred to him to hear him explain that whether or not they completed a dungeon depended largely on the objects they acquired. He then revealed that he had heard that the Ghost Forest dungeon contained a rank hidden object, which surprised everyone. Soli exclaimed that it was incredible, and that with such an object they could surpass all the other groups. Adele added that the additional rewards might be just the kind of thing she would appreciate. Professor Green curiously asked how Ansia always managed to discover information that even he didn't know. Ansia smiled and replied that it was the power of reading, then suggested that they try. The group agreed enthusiastically while Ansia observed how well everyone adapted to the task. He thought being an all-rounder suited him well. However, he knew that the rewards hidden in the Ghost Forest dungeon were originally found by Lin in his third year at Seoul Academy. Ansia realized that to truly immerse himself in this world, instead of remaining an outsider, he needed to be prepared. With that resolution, he told the group to get ready, and they will meet in 2 days, to which everyone agreed. That night, in a dark hallway, someone informed a man that he had obtained the information. The dungeon they chose was the Bezamor rank Ghost Forest. Parkerson said it was good news and that they should prepare for it. 2 days later, the day of entering the dungeon, Ansia and her group headed towards the Ardal Academy library. Unlike most dungeons that were located in outdoor spaces near the academy, the Ghost Forest was accessed through the Ardal Academy library. As they approached the entrance, Ansia mentioned that there were rumors that ghosts escaped from the dungeon and roamed the library. In the morning, due to a weakened barrier, Adele looked around nervously, dismissing it as a lie and insisting that there were no ghosts. But just then, a voice interrupted her, and said it was true. Adele screamed as she saw a man standing in front of them. The man quickly clarified that he was just an ordinary person, and explained that ghosts were a type of monster, so of course they existed. Ansia asked who the man was as she sniffed, trying to calm Dale by noticing the man's tie. Ansia commented that he didn't seem to be a student of magic and then asked why he was there. The man introduced himself as User Barton, a freshman, and said he had come to join them in the dungeon. Ants was surprised the name User Barton sounded familiar. He remembered hearing of a first-year student who had shown exceptional talent in divination magic at an early age and was regarded as a protégé by the outstanding second-year student in the theology department. User then asked if they could let him accompany them, promising not to be a hindrance. Ansia couldn't help but think that if someone like User had come specifically to join a magic class dungeon expedition, there must be a reason. He asked User if he had seen anything, which surprised User. Before User could answer, Ansia guessed that he was right and asked if he had a specific purpose and needed to follow them. Suddenly, a lady approached saying that Ansia should not be so quick to suspect others. He added that they were going into the Forest of Ghosts. Through the chaotic area of the User shelves could be of help. Lady Ion Gill gently touched Adele and explained that User could see ghosts, which made Adele scream in fear again. Gill apologized for scaring Dealey and introduced himself as John Gill, a sophomore in the theology department who had come as User's guardian. He explained that as Ansia had guessed, User had seen something during his recent divination magic practice and had since insisted on following Ansia. Never mind that Gil added that it was the first time he had seen such an intense reaction from the usually calm User, so he got his teacher's permission to accompany him on the condition that she act as his guardian. Ansia said she didn't care, particularly if that was the case, but asked if he was hiding any strange plans, such as being a spy for another group hired to sabotage his own. Gil reassured him by explaining that the only reason she accepted to be Uzel's guardian was for one thing. He confused, anxiously asked why he would be interested. Gil, smiling, responded that it was because he was completely her type, leaving Ansia stunned and baffled. Gil went on to tell Ansia that the moment he was assigned to the magic department and their eyes met, he simply had a hunch. He added that with his raised eyes, slightly disheveled brown hair and that one-sided smile when he saw it, he was exactly his kind of handsome. He always waited for the opportunity to see a handsome boy up close, noticing that Ansia did not move. One realized that her soul was practically being harvested and jokingly asked if she didn't know that Gil was not only famous in the theology department, but also known as a collector of handsome boys with high qualifications. He then said that since they were about to enter a dungeon full of dark attribute monsters, there was no harm in joining the students in the theology department, adding that craving problems were not really his concern. He used to agree and eagerly. He couldn't believe how unconcerned his team was about the situation. Jill then suggested that since everyone seemed to agree, they should officially enter the User dungeon. He took a book from the shelf, explaining that the condition for releasing the barrier was to remove a specific book. As he pushed the book away, a bright light streamed from behind the bookshelf, forcing them to cover their eyes. A portal appeared in front of them, and Ansia knew it was the entrance to the dungeon. Basilisk grunted, in shock and eagerness, realizing he must have been overwhelmed by the vision, as the only dungeon he had experienced before was a practice slame dungeon. He lifted Basilisk up, assuring him that despite the initial confusion, they had to move on, to which Basilisk agreed. A moment later, they were inside the dungeon already immersed in combat. Ansa gave the order to Daily to move and she responded with a confident, "I have it," as she brandished her sword in the air as one provided support. Ansia sighed, realizing that Professor Green's emphasis on teamwork was not in vain. The special item provided for the entrance to the dungeon was unique, and without it they would not be able to see the ghost-type monsters inside the dungeon if they had arrived. Members with low cooperation or those excessively focused on individual qualifications might have ended up fighting each other before they even encountered the monsters. Fortunately, they had decided in advance who would use the antifaces and assigned the scouting tasks to Adele and One, who were agile. He used to be strong against dark attribute monsters, and Basilisk, with his great firepower, took on the role of damage distributors, quickly eliminating smaller monsters. Ans pointed at a ghost, satisfied with his plan well executed. Meanwhile, Gil was telling User how impressive the group was, handling everything without even giving the theology students a chance to help. User replied that what was even more impressive was Ansia itself. Despite not taking theology classes or having any special objects, Ansia was able to perceive the movements of the ghosts so easily that it was like jumping into the battlefield blindfolded like warrior User. Then he confirmed to himself that the revelation he had received that day was accurate. The voice. He had told her that the outsider from the Department of Magic would save the world. The image of Ansia and Basilisk, which in the magic crystal shone before his eyes, reinforcing the prophecy. Usher shook himself from his thoughts and shouted that a powerful energy was approaching from the right. Ansia immediately looked in that direction, surprised to see thick purple smoke begin to emanate from the house. In front of them, smoke swirled around the group and Ansia felt a sudden chill, realizing that the pressure they faced was on a completely different level compared to facing a horde of ordinary monsters. Panic seized him as he wondered if they were already facing the monster or the boss. He remembered that the characteristic of the leader of the Forest of Ghosts was his psychic attack, that he had the ability to read and manipulate the memories of his opponent. Knowing this, Solia and Ansia prepared to face the boss's attack. Adele shouted that the boss was moving and asked if they were ready. They both responded with a determined yes, while Ansia thought that although it was unintentional, they had already resisted a similar attack once before. The chief then swung his scythe, and the attack hit Ansia directly. At that moment, he understood what it really meant to face a boss monster. His attack was incredibly fast. He also told himself that he should remain calm, remembering that this was not a physical attack, so there was no need to panic. He knew that if they could ignore the voices they heard and hold on to their fading consciousness, everything would be fine. But suddenly he found himself in a strange place and wondered where he was. He realized he was experiencing an alien sensation without sensory perception in a dark space, a world of nothing. Ansia quickly deduced that this must be a psychic attack similar to the final movement of a high-level ghost monster, known as the Void Room. As he looked around, he sensed something strange in the darkness. He knew that although a rank V dungeon wasn't easy by any means, the boss monster shouldn't be strong enough to use an ability like this. As he wandered through the void trying to understand what was going on, he suddenly heard someone scream, "You killed him! You bastard!" Immediately he turned and heard a familiar voice, apologizing only for another voice to respond angrily. "If you thought you couldn't handle it, you should have quit fast. Why did you act like you could?" Horrified, Ansia recognized the scene unfolding before him and realized that he was witnessing one of his own real memories. Ansia looked at her past self and thought that even after all this time some things didn't change. They were horrible. In his past life, he remembered a conversation between a doctor and her colleague. The doctor asked if he was the bastard who stabbed his superior in the back, while the doctor warned that he shouldn't mess with him lightly, calling him a real psychopath in the intern world. They didn't realize he was listening to their conversation, talking about him behind their back. He never regretted what he did. "I knew I was just doing what I had to do." The person who was denounced by a so-called doctor was a psychopath who engaged in abusive medical practices and had killed several innocent lives. So he exposed the doctor's atrocities to professors, students and university hospitals. However, this doctor was well connected and above him in seniority, and what followed was predictable. The medical field is incredibly small, so no matter what hospital he went to for his training, everyone avoided him by labeling him a snitch, despite being recognized as a genius. All he received in return was criticism and insults for ruining the path of one superior revered by another over what they considered trivial matters. This continues until one day, during a particularly difficult time, a colleague asked him what was wrong with him when he saw him shaking, reminding him that they needed to get into the operating room. But all he could answer was, "I don't know," while he saw his hands tremble, uncontrollably unable to stop the trembling no matter how hard he tried. When the head of the hospital found out about this, he was furious, questioned if they had a trembling vet performing surgeries, and shouted that he should not be allowed in the operating room. Never again. Later, when he saw a psychiatrist, the psychiatrist explained that it seemed that his repressed emotions manifested as tremors in his hands. Every time he entered the operating room, he could only answer that he assumed it was so. The psychiatrist also mentioned that this problem could not be solved immediately and would require continuous monitoring. He found himself wondering how he had come to be this way and what mentality had brought him to his boarding school. He was drowning in darkness and hopelessness when someone in the hospital cruelly asked him with what courage he had applied for clinical practice, calling him a shaky-handed bastard and reminding him that, although he had been an outstanding student as an undergraduate, he now saw himself as incompetent, shrinking under the weight of those looks and voices, with each day eroding his mental strength. He finally left the hospital on his own, the surprisingly weak and incompetent self of the past. He was then reincarnated as the Soul Academy Ansia. He thought enough time had passed, but now he realized that perhaps he hadn't changed at all. Just then she gave a light on Eli. To her surprise, Baseless, who appeared inside her, was astonished. How could Baseless invade someone's mental space, especially in the middle of a void created by the boss monster's psychic attack spell? As Baseless flew closer, they looked into each other's eyes, reminding him of the contract they had made. Ansia, he suddenly understood that taming was a magic that connected the hearts of the wizard and the monster. Ansia realized that Baselisse had sensed his negative emotions and anxieties from the past, which was why she had come looking for him. With a half-smile he asked Baselitz what kind of emotional dragon he was, comparing him to a loyal dog, but instead of answering Baselitz, just hugged him. Ansia realized that the choice he had made in the past was not just because he didn't like his superior, who acted like a conceited man, or because of youthful rebellion. It was because he couldn't ignore his little sense of justice, a need to save the lives of injured animals, and a refusal to succumb to corruption. Grateful for Baseliss's presence, he told him they had to get out of that void, thanking him for helping him regain his senses. Suddenly, Baselisk, who began repeatedly pointing to the side catching Ansia's attention, asked him if there was anything there and looked in the direction Baselisk was pointing, wondering what could be causing such a commotion. To his surprise, he gave a heart floating in the darkness. He wondered if it was a hidden object, realizing that since they were inside the monster, things invisible from the outside were now visible according to his memory. This must be the hidden object known as the Phantom Lantern, the core of the boss that was his heart, gathering power in his palm. Ansia knew that if they could extract the heart quickly they could defeat the boss. She shouted to Basilis, asking him to lend her strength again. 3 huge magic arrows formed around him and Basilis unleashed his firepower, infusing the arrows with his fiery breath of longing. He then launched the 3 arrows simultaneously towards the boss's heart, with Basilis' fire breath enhancing his power. The arrows struck the heart, piercing it and burning it. At the same time, the chief let out a terrifying cry of pain. As the ghost flashlight floated free right in front of Ansia, he grabbed it shouting to the boss that his old movie screening was over. With a satisfied smile, Ansia looked at the ghost lantern, knowing that they had successfully defeated the chief. Adele ran to Ansia, screaming, excited, that she had finally made it. He mentioned that he used to come out a while ago, but since he had been inside the monster for so long, everyone was worried. 1. And Gilmente, worried, asked if Ansia had really defeated the boss. In response, Ansia gestured for them to come closer and showed them the system message, confirming that he had completed the B-rank dungeon Forest of Ghosts. One exclaimed enthusiastically, saying that it was incredible. He used to notice the flashlight in his hand with eagerness. He asked if it was the hidden object. He added that he couldn't believe it really existed. One admitted that he had thought Ansia was showing off, explaining that the odds of finding a hidden object in a dungeon were extremely low, so he thought they were just playing it safe with that dungeon. Anxious admitted it was a reasonable assumption, but Solia's expression changed to one of concern. She asked if there wasn't something strange about the whole situation, pointing out that both she and he had believed she could handle the dungeon boss's mind attack, but it hadn't been that easy. They had both seen the Void Room. 1. Surprised, he asked if there really was a high-level mind spell in a great dungeon. Beetle then joined the conversation by pointing out that now that he used to mention it, there were many things that didn't add up. He pointed out that even the hidden object had a level of power that was tens or even hundreds of times stronger than usual. Ansius realized that it wasn't just his intuition, something was definitely wrong. He quickly asked where Neil and User were, which made the group suddenly remember them. 1. In panic he shouted that they were there a moment ago and wondered where they could have gone before they could search. They saw people in black robes emerging from the shadows, startling them. Then they noticed that Yal and User were being held captive by these figures. Parker, accompanied by his team, approached them with an air of superiority. He said that if those pesky theology students hadn't insisted on protecting the Ansia group, he would have knocked them out, but their interference had really driven him mad. Parker explained that although theology students might seem friendly to magic students, now everyone knew that I wasn't their true self. Parker then issued an ultimatum. They must surrender the people at the bottom, clearly referring to him and User, and join him and his team. Ansia's mind raced, realizing that Parker was really mad. He wondered if that was really how things would play out. Parker went on to explain that if Ansia and her group joined them, the project would now be practically assured. He said the preparations were almost complete and they only needed to meet the final conditions. Ansia, sensing something was off, asked Parker what he was planning. Parker replied that they needed his help, mentioning that since they had suddenly changed magic students, they now faced a severe shortage of manpower. Then Parker dropped a bomb. The ritual of summoning demons had originally been his project. The group was shocked. Adele, horrified, wondered if they were really preparing such dark magic within the academy, and questioned if the necromancy department was really serious about this. He remembered that Ants had been with Parker and his group until his freshman year, and he feared that he might have been interacting with the Necrons, even after he was assigned to the Department of Magic. The thought terrified her. He wondered if the dark wizard Ansia had kicked out of the baobab tree was part of a strategy to let his guard down. Adele looked at Ansia, silently hoping that her suspicions were unfounded, but then she overheard her conversation with Parker. Ansia casually responded to Parker by saying that the conditions were quite strict, but not impossible, so maybe it would help. Parker, pleased, said he knew he could trust Ansia, and that he was still on his side after all. Anxiety. He then listed the items needed for the ritual: pig's blood, straw, ogre scales, demon tree roots, and a suitable medium. Parker confirmed that he had prepared them all and had come for the medium. Now Adele, now even more worried, struggled to understand why the conversation flowed so naturally. She wondered what this medium could be of which they were talking. Parker, sensing Adele's confusion, proudly explained that he probably wouldn't know about such trivial magic. He then revealed that the essential component for demon summoning was a strong human capable of harboring the demon. He asked if they thought he had strengthened the power of the chief monster in the dungeon for no reason. The truth was that the summoning required a powerful mage, preferably one of sacred lineage, as a medium. Parker praised Ansia for his choice of team, saying that they were perfect as the middle, and laughed that Ansia was easy to deal with. Ansia reached out to shake Parker's hand, smiling as he suggested they work together again. But as soon as Parker grabbed her hand, Ansia tightened her grip and activated her discharge ability. Electrocuting Parker and sending him to the ground in shock, Parker screamed in pain, demanding to know what Ansia was doing. Calmed eagerness, I asked Parker if he really thought they could work together. After this, he told Parker that he had almost found himself caught up in the plan too, but there were some things that Parker had overlooked. First, Parker had trusted him too much, and second, Parker had underestimated him. As he spoke, Ansia revealed the wand hidden under his coat that had launched the blast. Parker stood up and asked him if he dared to deceive him. As he spoke, he released his dark power, declaring that he had been reassigned to the magic department, and now planned to turn his back on it completely. Parker positioned his wand and launched a powerful attack at him, shouting that he would also use him as a sacrifice. This made Ansia wonder why Parker's magic was so fast. Adele ran to Ansia and asked if he was alright. He felt her and she expressed her relief. Hansel reflected that even though they had trained together for so long, Adele had still come running at once, touching him for no apparent reason. Then he asked her if she was worried, and without thinking she replied that she was really worried, fearing that she had gotten involved with dark magic again. She added that if it had been real she would have killed him, for sure, but that she was really glad he wasn't a traitor. He laughed nervously, feeling relief, although he wondered whether he should be happy or not. She then mentioned that it looked like the previous lightning magic hadn't knocked him down, pointing out that it was a pretty strong attack. Ansia agreed, thinking it was a shock powerful enough to knock an ordinary person out. He recognized that Parker wasn't the main villain for nothing, and he knew that Seymour Parker was a character who would eventually grow up to be on par with Liam. Realizing that he had no choice but to give everything, he asked Adele for a favor that would hold back the necromancers who had come for Solia and him. He added that Parker was clearly aiming only at him with those frantic eyes. Adele agreed. Parker then threw an arrow at his wand and threw it at him. Fortunately, Ansia managed to create a shield just in time to block her, but Parker's next attack was so strong that the shield cracked. He wondered why Parker was so powerful even before he was fully developed, and he felt frustrated knowing that Parker wasn't there to fight with extras as the Parker launched another attack, asking if he was thinking of anything else. Parker's arrow sent his wand flying away, and before he could retrieve it, Parker grabbed him by the neck, warning him to think carefully about his current position. Parker picked him up from the ground, telling him that he knew too much about his plan and was becoming more famous every day. Parker asked if it wouldn't be beneficial for them to eliminate him early, before you had to go against the laws of original labor. It wasn't easy and that Parker wasn't an opponent he could defeat, but he wondered if there might be a small variable like the basilisk. Suddenly the basilisk attacked Parker from behind, throwing fire. When Parker turned to look at him, he was hit by the flames, screaming as his clothes caught fire and dropping them. Ants thanked Basilisk, who was now looking at him with concern. He was surprised to see the notification from the Basilisk system. Catrices had reached level 10, and had acquired the Mayan ability Spak, which summons a pillar of fire and lightning that simultaneously hits all creatures within 1 nem, except the user. I couldn't believe Basilisk would level up in a situation like this. Approaching Basilisk, he yelled excitedly about the perfect moment. He then ordered Basilisk to activate his ability, Mala Spike, and Basilisk obeyed, unleashing a combination of fire spikes and lightning. 1. He yelled at him, asking if he was crazy, and told him that if he was, he wouldn't have taken off the shield quickly, they would have been cooked too. Exhausted, Ansia collapsed on the ground, realizing that this was a big problem. I hadn't expected the spell to be this exhausting, and letting Basilisk get out of control was dangerous. Besides, he knew he couldn't handle Basilisk's power when he got excited. Just then, Parker emerged from the flames, muttering to himself if that was what it meant to call oneself a tamer. Parker told him he didn't know about the others, but he wouldn't fall for such superficial tricks. I couldn't believe Parker had taken that blow. As Parker approached, pointing his wand at him, he declared that even if he died, he would make sure to beat him to death, calling him a traitorous bastard. Ansius was horrified to see how Parker's wand gathered power to finish him off. Fortunately, someone suddenly hit Parker on the head, causing him to collapse in front of him. When Parker was on the ground, he looked up in confusion, seeing a woman in a robe holding the shovel with which he had hit Parker. He realized that the hooded figure must be a necromancy student and wondered why he had attacked Parker, who was on the same side. She then told him cheerfully that she was glad she wasn't late and that she was relieved that she had brought the protective shovel her grandfather made. He took off his robe, revealing his face, and asked if he was all right. At the sight of his face, Anne felt astonishment, but slowly lost consciousness. After exhausting all his strength in the dungeon, he fainted, and the situation was quickly resolved. The Necromancy and Dark Magic Club was temporarily suspended while Seal User and the rest of his team received time for treatment and rest. As expected, the results of his team project were outstanding. They received a perfect score of 100 out of 100. They were the only team in Professor Green's class to achieve a perfect score. Adele shouted in disbelief that her team was the only one to do it, while he cried without intending to stand out so much. Meanwhile, he heard his companions murmur about the hidden object they had found, praising his determination and speculating about him as the irresistible man who even surpassed the lean. He couldn't help wondering what those rumors were. After those hectic days, Ansia was now in the Academy's underground prison. As he approached the cell, the man inside approached, commenting that he had heard someone coming to visit, so he went out to take a look. When the man recognized him, Parker angrily asked why he was there. If she had come to see him cry in wide prison, she calmly told him to calm down, assuring him that he would get out of there without problems. Parker grew angrier, demanding to know what nonsense Ansha was talking about. He then asked Parker if it was true that he was a nobleman, and if his father would really sit idly by while his son is locked up in prison. He suggested that after the incident, Parker would probably be disinherited by his family, so maybe his father would leave him in prison. Parker lost control, gripping the cell bars tightly, angrily asking if Ants had finished talking and what he was doing there. Parker then demanded that I get to the point. Ants handed him a small envelope and told him to take it. Parker did it by asking what it was, but Ants simply turned to leave, saying that his father would come to get him out soon, since the son of the family was about to tarnish his name. He added that Parker's family was known to expel anyone who brought shame on their honor, so no one knows. Maybe Parker will end up like this too. Parker opened the envelope, glaring at Ansha, and winked at him, thinking Parker was still a child. After all, it seems that Parker wasn't afraid of getting involved in dark magic, but he was terrified of being disinherited by his family. When Parker saw the letter inside, he stood in wide shock and asked him if he was really so uninformed. Then he explained that if a situation like this arose, Parker should send that letter. He added that the letter claimed that the dark magic organization was blackmailing him. Of course, it was a forgery, but Ants had included the dark magic symbols properly, so it should look convincing. Parker confirmed that it looked real, almost perfect. Ants then told Parker that with that letter, the story of the unfortunate necromancy student, who had no choice but to use demonic summoning, would come to an end. He asked Parker if it was true that this would make things easier for his family. Parker, still in shock, asked why I was giving him this letter. Before Ansia could answer, Parker asked where he had gotten it. Ansia just smiled and replied, "Who else could it be?" insinuating it was someone at the academy who bothered to help. A moment later, Ansia was sitting with Ernest and the hooded woman. When Ernest asked her if she had delivered it well, confidently, Ansia answered yes, taking her tea from the table, and thanked Ernest for his help. After Ansia woke up the dean, Ernest called him separately and gave him an unprecedented award. Unlike before, Ernest said that he would grant her anything she wanted, so Ansia asked her for help in freeing Parker from that situation. Ernest told him that he was momentarily surprised when Ansia pleaded for clemency for student Parker. After all, Parker was the leader of the Dark Magic Club and a key figure in the incident. It wasn't something that could be solved by mere disciplinary action, but Ernest pointed out that Ansia must have seen more in Parker. Ansia explained that Parker was the type of person who grows stronger when he feeds on revenge. If he was kicked out of the academy with just one disciplinary action, Parker could hold a grudge, and take a darker path using his demonic talents for more sinister purposes. However, if the dean showed clemency and treated Parker properly, the Dark Magic Club would naturally be dismantled, and Parker's exceptional talents could be redirected in a positive way. The truth was, Ansia was just taking precautions in case Parker sought revenge later. However, Ernest Son saw and commented that it seemed that Ansia also had qualities of a teacher. The woman then revealed that she thought the same thing and introduced herself as Natalie, who saved him from being murdered by Parker. Ansia remembered that in the original work, Natalie was portrayed as a bright and charming student, adored by everyone at school. Just before Ansia fainted, she had suddenly appeared with a shovel among the students in the necromancy department, which was a real shock to him. Curious, he asked her about her true identity. Natalie realized that she hadn't explained it properly before and revealed that, in fact, she was an observer placed by the dean at the Dark Magic Club. This made Ansia realize that she was a spy and that the study of dark magic within the necromancy department had probably been overlooked. Ernest explained that having an intimate space to investigate dark magic is important to prevent students from mishandling it. Out of curiosity, Natalie went on to say that at that moment she really thought her heart would stop. The demon summoning plan was a matter of utmost confidentiality, shared only among a few students, all focused on Parker. If Ansia hadn't helped her, she wouldn't have been able to fulfill her role and the students in the magic department wouldn't have escaped unscathed. Then she thanked him sweetly once more, making him blush. He replied modestly that he only did it to save himself. Likewise, Ernest, seeing an opportunity, tells Ansia that he has a proposal for him, giving him an ominous feeling. Ernest then excitedly announces that the International Society for Magical Research wants him to represent him at the Ardell Academy, which surprised Ansia. Although he had anticipated some kind of recognition, he responds incredulously saying that he cannot believe he has been chosen as a representative of the academy, and suggests that they should send the best performing students in their place, thinking that he would prefer to avoid more problematic tasks, and step back. Ernest admits that he also considered it, but there was testimony that Ansia made the greatest contribution to the recent magical practice class. Also, Professor Green awarded him extra points, leaving Ansia confused as to how Green could have added extra points, in addition to a perfect score. Ernest informs him that he is currently ranked 3rd in the magic department, with Lin in 1st place and Adele in 2nd. Ansia is stunned while Natalia applauds him. Later, when he's back in his room, he's still in shock even as Vasilisk bites him, playfully in his head screaming, wondering if his master has finally gone mad. Baselist shakes his head to say no, while Ansia hits the wall screaming that he has enough problematic tasks. Now that his ranking has gone up, he's getting even more attention. Frustrated, he yells at the sophomores asking why they aren't studying. One noticed the crack in the wall and asked if it was the chaos of the next competition that was affecting him. He replied that he hadn't even aimed for 3rd place and was complaining about how annoying things kept happening. One told him in a mocking tone that he had bad luck, adding that he had always maintained 3rd place. He would be upset to hear that. Then he looked at him angrily, making the other quickly swear that he wouldn't tell Solia to change the subject. One suggested that they open the dungeon's personal reward to lift his spirits. He remembered that he had not had a chance to open the rewards yet, since he had been very busy. He approached, remembering that these rewards, in addition to the hidden objects, were personal treasures given to individuals for clearing the dungeon. He thought there should at least be some enjoyment in the random gash. In that desolate wasteland, when he opened the treasure chest, he wondered what he would receive after all the mess and expected a high-level item. When they looked inside, their mouths opened in shock. It was an egg. The system identified it as a stripe egg, a rank item guaranteed to hatch into the legendary stripe creature, with a 100% probability. He realized that if it was Tira, it meant another reptile and cried out in defeat. One crying with laughter, he shouted that he must really be a Tamer chosen by the heavens, which led him to shout at her, angry, to shut up. Later came the time for the magical research conference held in the Sanen Empire. It was a great event, with conferences and several exhibitions from the Association of Magicians, which lasted 3 days. The conference was a space for intellectual exchange and harmony, where talented magicians from various countries met to share their knowledge. School-based competitions in particular were fierce battles with the honor of both the country and the school in games. On the wagon to the conference he felt dizzy, already overwhelmed and hating the experience. Adele, sensing his distress, reminded him that the sophomore subject for the year was herbalism, and asked him if he knew anything about it. He answered blank, "What is herbalism?" Adele, worried, told him it was a big deal and reminded him that when the dean, Ernesto, fired him that morning, he had seriously mentioned that participating as a learning experience was good, but it would be even better if they could bring some prizes. His words left him dazed, and even more disoriented. Lihan then stepped in, telling him that if he understood mixing methods, he should be able to handle it. Lihan offered him a book, and suggested that they study before they arrived. Accepting the book, he prepared himself, acknowledging that he expected this from a model student like Leon. Meanwhile, Adele went off to get some drinks. Frustrated, he muttered about how Adele had gone alone. Right then, Leon didn't call back and timidly reminded him about the other day when he and One visited his room, specifically about the map he showed them. This reminded him of how he had accidentally taken a dark mage loot from the Baobabi, as Legion had seen it when he came, a coincidence that made him uncomfortable. Legion then asked if he had the map with him that day, to which he replied yes, explaining that it might be risky to leave it in the bedroom. He remembered that when Legion saw the map by chance, his face turned pale with eagerness. He knew the reason behind Legion's reaction. It's the same reason he personally attended this annoying event, even though he could have avoided doing so by faking an illness. The cube. Ansia was well aware that, although the Ardell Empire has an overwhelming number of white mages, dark mages can still cause significant incidents and disruptions in Soul Academy. The reason behind this is the gathering of ancient artifacts, known as cubes, by dark mages scattered around the world, which they use to tilt situations in their favor. The cube is a huge magical amplifier created by concentrating dark magic. It's a dangerous object that can turn an insignificant wizard into a great wizard. This is how the cube is described in the original novel. Ansia remembers that in the novel, the dark mages secretly built a massive tower and managed to gather all the cubes. They intended to use the tower as an amplifier to channel virtually unlimited magic through the cubes, and attack the world. Fortunately, in the original story, the main characters destroy the tower and take the cubes before things get out of hand. However, during that process, not only the supporting characters, but also some main characters die tragically. Because the novel is considered a bleak and hopeless story, the place where the cube first appeared was the Empire. Sanin. As soon as they arrive at the Sanin Empire, they head to the research conference hall where they attend classes, including Balism. They spend their busy time participating in various activities. 2 days later, he is in his room, stretching and thinking about how the competition starts. Tomorrow he lies in his bed remembering that Ernest had said it would be nice to win some prizes. However, since he is not familiar with herbalism, he decides to just see how things go. For now he plans to rest a little, but before he can close his eyes, he listens to someone and asks who it is. Lean laughs, asks him how he discovered it, and tells him it's impressive. Annoyed, longing, he asks, as he couldn't tell with all the noise. He then opens the window letting Lean in and asks why he entered through the window instead of using the perfectly functional door. Read his apology explaining that he originally planned to contact him but someone was in the hallway. He asks Lean if he really saw anyone in the hallway. To which Lean responds that someone had dropped Casper in the hallway. This surprises him knowing that Casper is a scouting wizard who moves with a cloak of invisibility. He then asks Lean why there are people like him here, noting that this is not something an attendee at the joint conference would do. Lean replies that he doesn't know the details either, but adds that he didn't just come to tell him about Casper, but came to ask him a favor. Lean asks him if he would hand over the map he has. Before Lean can explain any more eagerness, he interrupts by asking if it is for the cube. Lean, surprised, asks if he knows about the cube, but Longs decides to play dumb for now, responding that the map did have cube written on it. Inside, he thinks Lean must have known the true nature of the cube all along. Long ago, Lean's parents managed to seal the cube's power, but lost their lives at the hands of dark mages who tried to stop them. By the time Lean saw the map, he must have realized that the dark mages were moving again. Lean has probably calculated the massive impact the power of the cube could have on the world. As a result, the protagonist of the novel Lean has finally made his decision today, to continue his parents' legacy, finding the cubes, and protecting the world. Lean then tells him that tomorrow is the last day of the conference and the map indicates that the cube is buried somewhere nearby. He insists that they must find him before they leave and asks Ansia to hand over the map to him, but Ansia refuses, surprising Lean, who assures him that he has no intention of using the map for anything bad. Ansia tells Lean that she trusts him, but she cannot hand over the map knowing that the first cube is destined to be taken by the dark mages. He vividly remembers how much Leah regretted at that moment in the novel, her desperate screams, resonating beyond the text. Ansia knows that if they lose the cube now the difficulty of the story will increase exponentially, so he decides to handle it in his own way. He then tells Lean that although he won't hand over the map, he is willing to accompany him and insists that they go together. However, Lean protests, explaining that he cannot give details, but the cube is a dangerous object, and he has no intention of dragging Ansia into it recklessly. Ansia responds by telling Lean that she has never taken the easy or safe route. He admits that he doesn't know what the cube is or why they read or search, but he promises not to be a hindrance. He then reminds Lean that the map belongs to him, which means he has no choice but to take it with him. Lean is stunned for a moment, but eventually thirsts. Ansia smiles victoriously, but then Lean tells him to remember that they are going to win the competition tomorrow, leaving him confused. Lean then adds that after the competition there is something important they must do.